I'll say again, we've got an incredible night tonight here in the UK, morning, afternoon, I know for some of you. We've got 4 contributors. We've got 3 opinion pieces that we'll be playing slightly later on. Hello, David. Hello, Francois. Lovely to see you both too. We want you to stay very much in this meeting, stay present, use the chat, share your views, lead with kindness as we always do, but share your thoughts on this. And please show huge appreciation when our speakers finish and gratitude for them spending their time with us. But we're all here shoulder to shoulder. So let me know what you think about these things. If you want to connect with me, you just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm the only one with this name. You can ping any of us at team@mkai.org. If there's things you want to do, you want to blog with us, you want to speak with us, you want to get on some panels. Hello, Shannon. We're an open book on that. Our mission, again, embedding human sustainable values in AI is what we care about. So welcome. I have, it's 1 minute past 5. I'm going to buy us as much time as we can get. So I'll say thank you again to Data Reply UK and MK Council for putting a little bit of money behind us to make these things possible. Welcome everybody that's here, 106 and rising, not a bad turnout for an August holiday. So please enjoy tonight. I hope it's very beneficial. I hope you get lots of connections. And most of all, hello, Kevin, nice to see you. And most of all, just thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time, this special time together with us once a month. It's just incredible to be here with you. I enjoy it immensely and humbled hugely by all of you that join and spend some time with us. So I'm going to get us started tonight, and we're going to get straight into the action. So I'm actually going to introduce Simon Swan for you to start with. He's going to open up this session for us for about 10 minutes. To introduce Simon tonight, he contributes the core technology of synthesized. You'll hear more about them later on, and he's the machine learning lead. Simon is passionate about algorithmic and AI fairness. So we've got the right person in the right place here. And he's also the product lead for Fair Lens, a really interesting product that I shared actually with the community earlier on. So synthesized open source bias measurement and detection toolkit, right? That's what Fair Lens is. So prior to joining them in 2019, he was in the legal and medical industries as an NLP and machine learning engineer. He has an academic background, statistical thermodynamics and computational linguistics from the University of Cambridge. I thought that's where we knew each other from. Simon, of course, now I remember we were classmates. That's not entirely true, but it's very good to see you. I'm looking for you on my screen. There you are. I'm going to put you here as a spotlight for everybody. Simon, the stage is yours for 10 minutes. Please open this session for us. Tell us what you think about this question. And thank you so much for being here today with us.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Richard. I'm really excited to be here. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. We're going to get to discuss something that's so important. Especially as data truly begins to dominate our lives. The way I see it is we live in a world of uncertainty, and every day we're having to innovate and create solutions where we don't really have the full picture. A good example of this is with music suggestions on a platform like Spotify. So Spotify has the challenge of suggesting songs, and they suggest them to me based on an incomplete picture. They only have access to some of the songs I've listened to in the past, and as a problem, they're trying to give me the best songs as possible, with this limited information. And they do this quite well. They use other sources of information, other users' behaviors, and try and find some trends and generalize from this incomplete information. And they suggest new songs that, for the most part, I like. The problem is this doesn't always work for everyone. Other people get bad suggestions, and that can be purely just down to the fact that they like music that Spotify doesn't deal much with. The engineers, the ML engineers that were working on these algorithms, maybe they weren't aware of certain types of music, or there's just the data that they were using doesn't contain enough of these types of information, these types of songs, for them to get reasonable suggestions. And this isn't that big of a deal. It's just
apologies, Simon, back with you.
All good? Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's not that big of a deal. It's just someone not getting the songs that they like. But this is just the start of a problem. We then think about artists that make music on Spotify. Certain artists are going to develop certain types of music that don't get suggested to the general audience, and this can create a feedback loop where because of some algorithms haven't necessarily been able to with confidence suggest these songs that are less commonly played, less commonly heard. These artists then suffer. They don't get their music heard. Their music then never gets big, and so no one listens to that music, and the cycle sort of continues. And this is where we start to see a bit more of a consequence. Now you have some sort of systematic discrimination to a group of workers based on the types of music that they're wanting to create. So we're at this pivotal point in history, and we're trying to use machine learning and AI to make more and more powerful decisions, more powerful than we currently make. And we're doing this in this similar fashion of we don't have the full picture, but we have access to more and more data, and with that more and more data, we assume that we can make these, I guess, more and more powerful decisions. And for a significant part of this, recently, I've sort of bared witness to situations where this starts to go wrong. People haven't considered all of the sort of scenarios that their algorithm that they've sort of used is going to sort of be used on, and that starts to bad things can happen. So a good example of this is actually sort of a personal experience of mine. So I worked as a machine learning engineer for a hospital, and we developed an app to help detect and classify skin lesions, whether or not they were potentially dangerous, to try and encourage people to come in and see the doctor. And it was impressive in the sort of the test case, the limited test scenarios that we had. But you could take a photo of anything, firstly. So depending on other things in the background of that image that we might not have tested, there can be some weird effects that start happening. People don't understand, we don't understand fully how these models that we're making are sort of making their decisions. And this starts to have, like bad consequences. If you take a photo of a skin lesion and you've got a ring on your finger, and that's in the photo, that can significantly impact the model, because the model's never seen that before. And it's just a good example of, it's hard to think of every single situation when you're designing these things that are making decisions more complicated than humans can, at a sort of a higher accuracy, at a higher sort of, at a higher performance. And so, the sample of data that we had used had introduced bias. And that was because, I guess, the effect of that was people with different colored skin, to the examples that we used to make these models, didn't have as good a performance with this product. And so then you have someone who's suffering or not getting this tool that, and not getting the full effects and benefits of it, because of this. So there are lots of these sorts of situations and scenarios that we're sort of stumbling into, and it's coming up more and more in the news, and we really need to think about how we can start to build algorithms that are explainable, auditable, and transparent. Unfairly biased data, it really requires a collaborative solution. And I believe it's our responsibility to work with the wider community. We need to learn and understand how it can affect different people. And we want to then develop these sorts of innovations and drive more awareness to create solutions that properly deal with bias and to build a more equitable and inclusive society. And so with that sort of in mind, I'm really looking forward to the discussions that we're going to have today about how we can tackle some of these issues, and also to learn a little bit more about some of the pitfalls that have happened.
Simon, thank you so much. I really appreciate you opening up the conversation for us today, and with your kind agreement to join the panel later on. And perhaps share some more specific examples of your work and what you do in this area to combat this. At this point, I'm going to try the technical bit again here, and I'm going to play some video clips that we have prepared in advance for today, just some quick short opinion pieces that have come from our community before we move into the next speakers. So it'll just take me one short moment to do this, and then hopefully we will be ready to watch these. Okay, so he kicked me out. You've got to love this technology, so that's fine. We'll come back around to those a little bit later on. So let me introduce and get my camera working in a moment. Our second speaker for tonight. So it's my absolute pleasure to be introducing Ati tonight, a reputable, energetic evangelist of digital transformation. She has digital strategic and operational experience in business and IT partnerships, experience in leading strategic digitalization programs for multinational organizations in EMEA, LATAM and APAC regions, including managing digitalization strategies in South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and the DRC. So let me find you on the screen, and there you are to make you spotlighted. Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, and you, Richard?
Well, apart from Zoom just crashing when I tried to play video, I'm extremely well, but nothing we can't figure out.
All right, no problem. I think it's so interesting how I'm pursuing my lifetime or childhood dream of being a pilot. So 2 days ago, I went to the doctor's rooms where I needed to do a medical. And then the lady at reception just gave me the medical form for air hostesses, right? So then I'm like filling out this form and I'm like, no, this is a wrong form. And then she looks at me and she's like, what aeronautical medical are you here for? I'm like, for a pilot. And she's like, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I just assumed. I giggled. I was like, wow, what are the chances that I could experience bias in human form when I'm about to speak about bias in AI? So I think as we had a conversation, Richard, about how bias plays itself out in the physical form, how it can actually seep itself in the machine learning and in automation space, is that the way that I've seen and experienced bias in the corporate space is where I've got there's a friend of mine who was we were doing the MBA, she was explaining how she's part of product development and being able to segment and target specific customers. So I live in South Africa, and there's one of the biggest townships in South Africa is called Soweto. So they had gone out to do market research. And then in their research, it actually showed that about 70% of the residents in Soweto's expenses actually goes to food, right? And then I think 20% goes to transportation, and then like 5% food, and then the numbers then dwindle really. But then the feedback that they got from their research team was that this is so true, that Africans love food, right? And so she sat there, and at that time she wasn't an executive, but she was part of the team that was consuming the feedback. And they were explaining how maybe we need to create products that will talk to, and this is a banking institution, so they're trying to get consumers to consume more of the banking products, right? So they then try to highlight how maybe we need to target their love for food, and it's indicative of their tradition, that in any cultural event, there's always a lot of food, and that's why it's now showing up in their income. And then what she said stood out for her was how everybody else in the room was consuming this feedback, because generally the numbers were actually saying that 80% of the salaries at the time were predominantly going to food. And then she actually put her hand up and she was like, logistically, I know this environment because I grew up there. And when you think about it, these people use public transportation. So therefore for them, their spend on transportation will be minimal. When you look at where they stay, the government offers them free education. So it's not to say that they don't value education when you look at their income breakdown, but they actually spend their money on food because a loaf of bread is a loaf of bread and it costs X amount. Whether you live in a high income area or low income area, when you look at how much it is really relative to the income, it will be a higher percentage because bread doesn't discriminate on where you stay. So it meant that for all the people that were in the room that purely relied on the numbers, they would have gone and actually targeted the incorrect customers. They would have actually gone and produced the incorrect type of products because they lacked the diversity within their team, because predominantly the people that did the research were white, middle-aged white men. And it so happened that she was one of the few Black females in the room that was able to actually look at the information and have her lived experience and be able to disseminate that actually, in as much as the numbers are true, right? If you didn't have context to the environment where these people lived, you would then automatically assume that for them, they value food over education, which is not necessarily true. And if you then understand then the potential ripple effect that if you're an educational institution and you want to enter that market that is in the township education, chances are based only on the numbers, right? You wouldn't have thought that that was a viable education opportunity. But when you look at how far children have to travel for this education, you then would have seen a different dynamic and being able to approach that market in a different angle. But because there was a lack of diversity in the team, there would have been an invalid understanding and simulation of that data. And then another example that I want to use is that in the South African context, there's a narrative that says a lot of South Africans don't save, right? And the measurement of saving generally or universally would be, you look at the employed individuals, you look at their income, you look at their income to savings ratio. But then in the South African, generally also in the African context, the concept of being able to save in a communal form is quite prevalent. In South Africa, we call it a stokvel, right? So a stokvel will play itself out in the sense that me and my friends or my mother and her friends would come together with a unified view of saving, right? So every month, I've never seen a level of commitment to repayments or payments, right, like I have in the stokvel community. There's a level of trust because they all have a unified view of what they want to save for. But when you look into the system and in terms of their savings, these people generally don't save in individualized form, but they save in a group form. But when you look at, you can't then target those people because you see them as a group of people that's almost saving in inverted commas in a black hole. So therefore, if you want to then target that demographic of people, you will then struggle because if you just use purely the numbers of what people are saving, those numbers don't actually stand out. And so for when you're then creating a product that will target those kind of individuals, you almost fail to target them because you almost don't understand the logistics that come and their understanding of saving. So I think what I found interesting is that there's been an upsurge of these stokvel groups actually buying property. There could be 12 groups of friends that come together. Their main purpose is to increase their investment in property. So 12 friends come together, they save X amount a month, and then at the end of the year, they buy property cash. And then each year, each individual gets to actually get property in buy it cash because there's a level of trust and honesty that comes with being in that group setup. And I think I was reading an article just 2 days ago where one of the bigger banks in South Africa has actually created a product now where a home loan application can involve up to 12 people. So then I think it's then now talking to how the different institutions are starting to see that the way that we are going to be inclusive in the African context in terms of financial inclusion needs to change because we can't use traditional models that were based in the Western world to try and be inclusive in the financial space. And I think if we were to take the current bias that exists in our current risk models in terms of creating products for the financial sector, we stand the chance of actually further entrenching the bias that actually exists. Because if you really think about it, the kind of damage that bias can have in AI is kind of twofold, right? In that a lot of people won't really have the external context outside the environment where this research was actually taken. That the numbers don't lie, and I'll never disagree with that. The numbers are saying, in inverted commas, people don't save, but it doesn't actually take into context the environment that these people operate in. And that the moment other people don't have the true context of the environment that the information was collected in, the concept of the damage linked by influence is that you will then take this information from a trusted source, and then the idea would be that if AI says it, right, then therefore it means it must be true, which means that we could further entrench the exclusion, financial exclusion that currently happens in the African context, because there's lack of understanding, which then leads to bias. And I think what will further perpetuate the damage caused by this bias is that a lot of these AI solutions that we build, if they carry on coming with this angle of not being inclusive in how we actually look at the dynamics of the people that are part of these teams, is that when we then automate these AIs, in the future, they will further entrench the notion that X amount of people don't save, and therefore we will further perpetuate the notion of exclusion in the financial sector. So I found that quite interesting in how what we don't realize, that prejudice is part of human nature, right? And because humans create the machines, they actually unintentionally impart the bias into them. And so therefore, in our current time, it's been impossible for us to actually not see the effects of bias. I think I can't even imagine what it will be like in the future, where the power of computing will further perpetuate the bias if we actually don't call it out. And I think what becomes also difficult in calling out this bias is that because of the lack of the diversity, I'll talk about in the African sense, the lack of the diversity means that the people that are in that space don't even realize that they're biased. So they're unintentionally creating a future that is biased in the most digital sense, which is even bigger than what we're actually going to experience right now. So I think that's it, Richard, on my side.
Thanks, Etty. That was a really wonderful talk, I must say. And to summarize, I just feel that it is so important to have the inclusivity into our systems, our data, and how the systematic but unknown bias gets introduced, how people have prejudices, and so will the data have those prejudices, the assumptions based on countries, areas that people just make without having a thought that this could be different. So research and insight is so much needed when you make the data models, when you train your data exactly, so that it does not perpetuate further in the future. Because as we know, AI is going to be ubiquitous. It is ubiquitous at the moment. It is present everywhere, and it's the future. So it is our responsibility to make it more inclusive, more diverse, and hence remove all these assumptions and mitigate the bias into it. I think that is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll move on to Richard for the video clips that we were going to play, and the questions I'll be taking up on the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaisal. Yes, absolutely keep those questions coming through, because we will have plenty of time for them at the end. So I don't trust Zoom not to crash on me again. So in the true spirit of delegation, I'll let somebody else take the risk and ask Alex if you can try and play our videos.
Of course. Thank you, Richard, and fingers crossed for this one. Let's go.
Okay. You're better at this than me, so this...
What will it take to solve the bias problem in AI?
So this is really a huge question, and I don't think I have the answer for it. What I have is that there are just maybe a few tweaks and suggestions that I'm happy to share with you about how data teams and the AI teams can do and adopt in order to design, implement, and deliver products that can be less biased. And the first things that I would like to share is about the team. So we tend to think that the best AI product is based on the best model algorithm, and this is definitely something that we can't ignore. So good algorithms means definitely good quality. But we also have to think about people, the human people that are working on that. And as long as we can have a team that is inclusive and that can embed and have different perspectives and views, we can really, in this way, we can really try to avoid or at least decrease the bias that is embedded and is present in our, intrinsically, I would say, in our products. And another thing that it's really worth to mention is about the data quality. As we know, AI is a data-based product, and as we also know, garbage in and garbage out. So it's really important that we take care about the quality of the data that we are using, and that we ensure that this data is good and it doesn't mirror itself the bias that can be in our society. Because it's not just about completeness and being sure that the data are actually representative of our world, but it's also making sure that those data are not including themselves as a mirror of the society, the bias that is in the society, in the world we are living. And this is something that it's crucial. And again, an inclusive team is essential in this context to make sure or to support in this kind of strategy. And moving from the design part to the actual implementation, another thing that I would strongly suggest and recommend is the use of many metrics and many and all the can I say computations that are currently in place and that are provided by the big tech providers to analyze the output itself of our result. And this is something really important. We don't really have to stop, we can't stop in deep diving and to explore the output of our results. Something that I'm really struggling with and I'm really afraid of is what's called validation bias. And validation bias when you have a result that actually matches what you think is right. And this is something really dangerous, because if the result of my model actually represents what I think is right, I will stop deep diving the results and I will stop asking questions. And this is exactly the point where biases and wrong results start.
One of the ways of solving the bias problem in AI is to put sufficient testing in place. And what that means is to do effectively blind testing. So something like the Coca-Cola taste test or the judgment of Paris, where bias was that French wine should really be better, but actually in a blind test, the experts actually preferred the Californian wines. This kind of blind testing really is about taking out the salient factors in the data and seeing that if it still performs correctly. This way, we can really test out AI judgment and see that it's doing the right thing without bias.
Hello, Michaela.
Hi.
What will it take to solve the bias problem in AI?
Well, we have to do many things, I think. But first of all, we need to be aware that we humans are biased. So double check our assumptions and don't take the first thing that we come out. Second, we need to test our models with real people. And making sure that we test with a varied group of people. Also, I think that we need to leave behind the idea that algorithms are a black box. Instead, we need to promote transparency and involve us in the important decisions and take action, not saying, oh, it's the algorithm fault, and instead do something. And finally, we need diverse teams in order to reduce bias, because I think that in any type of problem, if we have a diverse team, the solution is gonna be better.
Thank you so much for playing those, Alexandra.
Anytime, Richard. It was a true pleasure.
Thank you. I will ask Vibhab to give us a short community update before we move on to our next speaker, which is Ryan. Vibhab, are you there? There you are.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the event. I hope you're having a great time. Quick update about what MKAI is. If you're thinking on AI, if you're someone who has non-technical expertise or you have technical expertise and you want to get engaged in conversation on artificial intelligence, MKAI is a community where we have conversation. We have a Telegram group, an open discussion group where we discuss and engage in AI conversation. We also have, if you're interested in specific areas of artificial intelligence, for example, AI, if you care about the planet, we have a group on AI in green economy, biodiversity, GIS and sustainability. We have a group on AI in law. We have a group on AI in philosophy. We have a group on space ethics. Different areas of your interest. Those conversations can also be, you can also join those. Starting point is the link that Sridhar has just shared. Join our Telegram group and join the conversation. Apart from conversation between events and these events that you're a part of, we have an AI ethics study group. We're doing Merv Hickok's study group on AI and ethics in the last session. So all of us are thinking deeply on ethical AI. In addition to that, we also have an MKAI blog, which are 2 blogs. We have a community blog. If you want to understand the groups that I spoke about, the conversations or the insights that come out of it, follow the MKAI community blog. We also have guest blogs. So if you're thinking on ethical AI, responsible AI, human-centric AI, you can reach out to us and we will solve. And if you're interested in writing and want to express it, please reach out to us. Finally, if issues of women in AI resonate with you, then we have a Women in MKAI group. As you might know, the MKAI leadership group, 60% is women-led. So Women in MKAI is a group that provides support and space for meaningful and constructive dialogue around challenges that women in AI face. If this is something that resonates with you, that's another reason for you to look at MKAI's work. And finally, how would you do that? Richard has shared a couple of links. I will share all of the links together and in one go here as well. And of course, if you have any questions, anything you're wondering about it, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm available on LinkedIn. Please enjoy the event. These are some fantastic talks and a great topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vibhab. It's very kind of you to give that update. I've put a few links in, but if you can share them as well, that would be fantastic. And we are making great strides through our agenda today. And it brings me great pleasure now to be introducing the next speaker, the leader of For Humanity. And many of you will know this brilliant person, which I'm going to put on stage so that we can see you, Ryan. So Ryan, welcome, welcome. Let me introduce you. You are the founder and volunteer executive director of For Humanity. I know that many people who are in the MKAI community are also present in your work. Some are even, I think, fellows or hoping to become fellows. We are cheerleaders, supporters, fans of everything that you do, and very much, glad to support it. So in terms of you, you founded For Humanity after a 25-year career in finance with global business experience, risk management expertise, and a unique perspective on how to manage the risk, which led you to launch and fund this non-profit entity. So Ryan is focused on the independent audit of AI systems as one means, but a very important means to mitigate the risk associated with artificial intelligence. And as such began to build a trust model associated with the first of its kind process for auditing AIs, using a globally crowdsourced process to determine the best practices. I'll say again, he serves as For Humanity's Executive Director and Chairman of the Board of Directors. He's responsible for the day-to-day functionality of For Humanity and the overall curation of the independent audit. I see amazing announcements coming out all the time, Ryan, from your organization. I'm very, very glad you're doing the work that you're doing. I'm very glad that you're here. It's very much your space, your time. I'll say thank you again for being here, and the stage is yours.
My pleasure. It is a great honor to talk to this community. As Richard just said, our communities are aligned. And so it has been wonderful to see people from MKAI coming into For Humanity and For Humanity people heading into MKAI, because we are doing similar work, or our hearts are aligned. And to me, that's the most important thing. So as we talk about bias, we actually have to start with independent audit of AI systems. Why? Because anything that I'm going to say about bias is going to be a function of independent audit of AI systems. That's the how for how we tackle these issues around bias. Now, before I even start with that, though, I want to manage the words we use. Eliminate bias is not a goal. It's not a target. It shouldn't be. It's a lovely ideal, but it can't be more than an ideal. There is so much inherent bias in who we are as human beings, it can't be eliminated. The math of the term bias also tells us it is impossible to eliminate it. And therefore, we want to use a very important word, which is mitigate bias. That should be our goal, but it also should be our mantra. Because when we are mitigating bias, what we are doing is recognizing that it will always be there, and that this is work we always have to do to make sure we're best reducing the risk of the impact of bias. Now, in independent audit of AI systems, this is our primary process for managing the risks from AI to humans. Our entire mission is to mitigate risks we refer to them as downside risks, from AI and autonomous systems to humans, to get a better result from all these systems. It's not anti-technology. We're totally cool with the technology as long as we can mitigate these big risks. The 5 areas that we focus on are ethics, bias, notice it's a whole area unto itself, privacy, trust, and cybersecurity. And the reason that we want to put this system in place is to solve the how question. Simon and Ati all made excellent points about identifying where the issues lie, or even taking steps to remedy these issues. Here's the problem. Until they are required and people are accountable for it, their jobs are on the line, their businesses are on the line, or even legally, their lawfulness is on the line. A lot of times it's going to be talk, because this is a difficult thing to do. And so the nature of independent audit of AI systems creates an accountability, governance, oversight infrastructure that demands reporting requirements into organizations, committees, typically Algorithmic Risk Committee, Children's Data Oversight Committee, and a standing and responsible, coordinated, organized, and reporting into the CEO Ethics Committee, which is going to be important to my talk, which is why I'm kind of highlighting. These bodies are responsible for owning this risk, mitigating this risk, documenting this risk. And you'll see why documentation is important too by the time I finish. All of this reports into the CEO, because the CEO is responsible for the mitigation of bias. Let's take a specific example for a second. In the United States, the EEOC is responsible for governing equal employment opportunity. And it's based on the Civil Rights Act. And they have determinations of what is fair. It's one of the few quantitative measures of fairness in the world. It's called the 4/5 rule. 4/5 rule basically says that whatever my highest selection rate of hiring is, typically white males, but we just use that as an example, right? All my protected category variables must be within 4/5 of that ratio. Now, you can be under, you can be over. There's statistical reasons. There's just even opportunity reasons. There's small sample size reasons why you might be over, under, around. But the point is this is a measure of fairness that requires justification, and it's one of the ways that bias, which is illegal in employment and hiring in the United States, is tackled. So as we go to deploy the tests, the solutions, the inputs, the audit criteria to figure out how to manage where these risks come from, we want to think of it from that legalistic government responsibility or government law, but also CEO responsibility of having to eliminate, to mitigate risk from bias, okay? Bias can come in three, we characterize it in three different places. I put a paper in, which is kind of the background of the rest of this talk, that focuses on bias in data sets. We think of bias in three places. Bias can come in at the data set level, at the architectural input level, and at the outcome level, usually in the form of adverse impact or disparate impact, however you want to define that. The paper focuses only on data. Data is the representation of people into these AIs and autonomous systems. And there are so many ways that data can become, or data can bring bias with it into the equation from the beginning. And so what we want to do is we want to create auditable rules. Simon mentioned this already. He said auditable AIs or auditable systems to try to tackle the bias issue. We agree completely. But let me tell you what auditable means. It doesn't mean some teams inside of an entity looking at the design and development of another team. That is not auditable. Auditable means three very precious things. It's done by outside certified practitioners. Remember, we've been doing audits for 50 years. We've just been doing them in finance. As we bring them over to AI and autonomous systems, we have to remember these words aren't new. Audit has very particular special meaning. So the first one is audits are done by certified practitioners and they're independent of the entity. Number two, they have to be an independent set of rules to govern what is being audited. In other words, the auditor can't come into the equation and say, I will audit you on my rules. It doesn't work. It's an inherent conflict of interest, and there's insufficient objectivity on what those audit rules look like. And then the third thing is that an auditor must be totally independent, and they do their work actually over a target of evaluation on behalf of the public. And this creates a very important tension between the auditor and the entity. The law of independence applies here. So an auditor cannot get any remunerations from the auditee other than the fees associated with their audits. They can't do strategy, software installations, guidance, compliance, pre-audit. They can't do anything. So no upside potential, and they have to wear downside risk. And that downside risk comes from if they assure compliance that is not there. So if Richard was the auditee and I'm his auditor, and we've been working together for years, we have a great working relationship. We get lunch every time afterwards. And I walk in and I say, Richard, have you built the algorithmic risk committee? And he says, yeah, Sally, Susie, Joe, and Jimmy are all on the committee with me. And I smile. I know he's telling me the truth. But as his auditor, I got to lean in and I got to say, Richard, you know, you got to prove it to me. You got to show me the meeting minutes. You have to show me the roster. You have to show me how the algorithmic risk committee impacted the system. Why? Because I don't work for him. I work for the public, and the public relies on me as the auditor to assure that he is compliant, and I get in trouble if I've assured compliance it's not there. So the auditor requires proof. Why do I tell you all of this backstory? Because when we talk about auditability, we have to have and set up binary rules. We have to have the ability for every single audit criteria that the auditor is going to assess in bias has to be a binary set of rules. Why? Because if I'm sitting there wondering if someone is compliant with an audit rule, if I'm wondering, what am I going to say? not compliant. I have to, because otherwise my risk is on the line and I cannot defend my position. So creating binary rules in a way that allows the auditor to say compliant or not compliant is necessary at the audit level. You know what doesn't create audit rules? Standards, guidelines, frameworks, laws, best practices. So if you want to know what For Humanity does, we practice an art of taking all of those things and crafting them into binary rules. And when we do that in bias, we have a whole set of requirements we need on data quality, labeling, data representativeness, and so on that I'm going to get into in a moment. Now, it might sound like we think we're pretty cool at For Humanity. We are a charity. We are a nonprofit. Every single person is a volunteer. We are now 425 people from 45 countries around the world and growing. And so what we do is a service. We practice this art, this crafting of all these laws, best practices, guidelines, frameworks. We turn it into auditable rules, and we submit it to governments, we submit it to regulators, and we say, here, is this what you meant? When they say, nope, we go back and do our work, and we come back and we say, here, is this what you meant? And when they finally say yes, then we license this to auditors, pre-audit service providers all around the world who will now do the work in bias. And so now with that background, knowing what auditable means, and most importantly, how audit will change and mitigate bias. That's the basis of what I've covered so far. So now let's talk about bias, okay? When we talk about bias, we want to talk about it in a couple of different places. And Ati brought up one, and I want to talk about that one first, which is diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback. Now, the world's been pretty good historically at doing this on outcomes. They're called focus groups. We get a bunch of people together. Maybe they're diverse, maybe they're not, maybe they're multi-stakeholder, maybe they're not, but we at least have a process for assessing outcomes and kind of saying, did we do good, right? That companies are very used to this process. Here's the problem. Sunk cost bias and confirmation bias, which was actually mentioned in the video. She used the term validity bias, confirmation bias, same thing, okay? Those things are massive in the design and development process. And if you wait until outcomes to assess risk to multi-stakeholders, you're done. It's too late. So what independent audit of AI systems, what our audit rules require, even in our GDPR certification, which is with the ICO today, okay? We require diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback at the design and development phase to assess risk. And this is hugely important to cut off problems before they happen in that design and development phase, to manage this process before it's gone too far, but most importantly, to provide human agency into this process. Diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback is external viewpoints on how this algorithm, this solution, this AI is being built. Now, we use the word diverse inputs. When is diverse satisfied? Do we want to leave that decision up to the designers and developers? Absolutely not. They don't have objectivity on this matter. So this is where we come to this ethics committee. And what we do is we require, see, we found that all through the design and development phase, and let me just run it through for you real quick: necessity, proportionality, reliability, validity, KPI design around concept drift, dealing with soft law requirements, dealing with benchmarking, all of these issues typically handled by the design and development team are filled with instances of ethical choice. Engineers who were given a problem, solve this problem. That's what they're great at. We celebrate them for that. But all through this process, they're making instances of ethical choice along the way. And they're not even aware of it, and they're certainly not trained for it. So what we want to do, what the audit process does, is it extracts these instances of ethical choice. It looks around the organization, and it basically said, who's the most objective part of the organization to handle these key and challenging issues? And the answer was a standing and responsible ethics committee trained in algorithm ethics. And so they're the ones, when we look at diverse input and multi-stakeholder feedback process, they're the ones who will determine if the groups that we have in place are sufficiently diverse to provide this input and this risk assessment. So that's just one example of how we aim to mitigate bias. This is in the design and development, and most importantly, the risk assessment and impact phase of the process. Now let's talk about bias in data sets. When we talk about bias in data sets, there are so many places and biases that can come in. Sample bias, non-response bias, cognitive bias. Let me tackle non-response bias first. The inputs for this are often technological. And by being technological, there are certain groups, it could be the poor, it could be the disassociated, it could be the disconnected, it could be the elderly, who are naturally disconnected from the ability to participate in these processes. That's bias right from the get-go. That's bias right at the technological level, right at the interface with the process, okay? So that is something that must be considered in the process. And for example, we ask and demand of the Algorithmic Risk Committee that they consider this, that they document what they're doing about it, what they're examining about it, and what they establish as mitigations. Cognitive bias. This is a huge problem. There are over 300 cognitive biases by some measures. There are not quantitative, there are not technical measures yet today to tackle this. And so again, what we want to do is we want to put it in the hands of the Algorithmic Risk Committee, in the hands of the Ethics Committee, to basically say, think about what you're doing. Take some time to talk about it, document that conversation, document the places that you're concerned about cognitive bias, and then take steps to mitigate the risk. This will improve and grow over time. People will develop tools and systems to help enumerate this process better. It's not even here today. So I think this is one place where we'll see developments over time. So I want to set those two aside, non-response bias and cognitive bias. And now I want to focus on the data. So in the data, we have a ton of problems. First off, we can have straight up sample bias. Our training set doesn't look like our broad community, our testing and validation set, okay? Simple disagreements of statistical characteristics, we have to ensure that that does not happen. So the audit requires that. The audit requires the documentation of that. Just tackling sample bias at the beginning. But let's talk about benchmarking and representativeness for a second. Let's say I want to hire a new graduate in computer science, and I want to look at gender bias for a second. What's a fair benchmark to compare this against? I can start with 51-49, that's the share of women to men in the world, and maybe that should be my benchmark. That's gender, you know, if I'm apart from that, am I biased? The answer is by definition, yes, okay? And that also tells you why it's impossible to perfectly match up to our benchmarks. But here's the thing, I'm going to give you another reasonable benchmark. Remember, I'm hiring, so I have a job to do, an undergraduate with a computer science degree. You know what the ratio of men to women is currently today in computer science degree graduates? 82-18. Is that a reasonable benchmark for me to use? Yes, it is, because it reflects the universe of which I'm trying to pull from. At the same time, I am going to equally tell you it was reasonable and it's biased. Why is it biased? Well, of course it's biased because we know that there are whole systemic reasons in our system why more men go get computer science degrees than women. And there's huge efforts to try to rectify that, and they're fantastic. So it's a reasonable benchmark, but it's also biased. And now I have this ethical choice problem of what should my benchmark be for representativeness of women in my data set, and how do I rectify that? Let me throw one more thing in the mix. 82-18 is today's distribution between men and women. What was it 2 years ago? It's about 16% to 84. So now we have a trend line, right? If I do 82-18, am I behind the trend? If I'm socially responsible, if I'm trying to mitigate bias, if I'm building a benchmark that improves our standing, my standing, this company's standing vis-a-vis this particular question of gender bias, maybe my ratio shouldn't be 18 to 82, maybe it should be 20 to 80. Maybe that's a reasonable sort of bottom line benchmark because I know the direction the trend line's hitting. Here's the point. All of these are ethical choices. What we are benchmarking around when we stop mitigating bias by trying to introduce adjustments to our data set to mitigate bias, the choice that we make on setting that benchmark is an ethical choice. Now, let's take the other end of the spectrum. 51-49, male, female. What if I did an entire database of women? Is that bias? Yeah, I've actually introduced reverse bias or reverse discrimination or affirmative action or however you want to describe it. I've gone too far. And so figuring out what is an appropriate place, not a perfect place, not an elimination of bias, but an acceptable place in which data representativeness is executed is an ethical choice. And you know who shouldn't make it? Designers and developers who are embedded in the system. The objective, accountable governance role needs to happen from outside, and they need to say effectively, yes, you're cool. Now, let me take that one step further in terms of how audit will effectuate what we call a virtuous circle of feedback. All of these decisions, and there's many more, I won't go into them now. I've talked way too long. I'm boring you all to death. I'm 100% certain of that. But as all of these decisions are made across the process, what we are going to ask entities to do is not only are they going to have to put in place bias mitigations all throughout the process, mitigations around labeling, mitigations around data quality, mitigations around benchmarking, okay? But now they're going to have to disclose these in what we call a data disclosure document, which will talk about residual risk from bias, which will talk about the decisions that they made to try to mitigate bias, show those risk mitigations, and you know what? It's going to do it publicly. Now, what happens when you do it publicly? First off, it's required by the audit. Ideally, it would be required by law over time. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act demands data representativeness. So it's highly likely that when that is passed, these issues of data quality, labeling, representativeness, bias mitigation will become law, at least as it affirms the artificial intelligence covered by the law. It will pass. The question is, what's the forum going to look like in the end? So now what we will require through that is, here are the disclosures. And why is this a virtuous feedback loop? Because the company is actually, in this case, when they're following the rules, when they're following the law, they're trying to get it right. They're going to put out there, here's what we're doing. And good and responsible citizens will then feed back on those disclosures and kind of make some arguments. Oh, you use 1882 as your benchmark for gender, for deciding if you needed to mitigate that some more, and you didn't follow the trend line. Maybe you could be more aggressive next time. Maybe you could support this mission. And there's lots of other ways that these data disclosures will allow for a positive, virtuous feedback loop where the company can learn societal views on this. Academics will come in and say, we've done research on fairness, and it looks like this. And people will learn and grow and advance. The nature of what we're trying to build in independent audit of AI systems is, it's over my head. And I'm sorry to be a little bit, advertising, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, accountability and trust powered by governance and oversight. Building this infrastructure in place so that it actually happens. And we stop just talking about it and putting pretty words around it and maybe occasionally trying to tackle these problems when good people try to do good things. And now we're demanding it. Now we're requiring it. Now we're ensuring that the work that gets done is in the best interest of people through these auditable rules. Talked a lot. Hope it wasn't too much, Richard. I hope it was informative. I hope you all will feedback on better ways to do this. As Richard mentioned, this whole process is crowdsourced. This whole process is a place where each one of you can come to have a place to have your voice heard on these subjects, And there's a number of people in this room who I hope will sort of tell you that that's true. So I guess I'm going back to Jaisal. So thank you, Jaisal, and thank you all for this time and letting me talk your ears off.
Thanks, Ryan. I think I'm just mesmerized with the talk, and there's so much information, the kind of work that you have been doing, the pillars that you have been working. I think I'm involved along with Vibhav as well. The pillars that you have introduced. I think it would be really unfair to summarize in few words, but I would still go ahead and do it. Thanks for introducing us to the various kinds of bias that could come into any of the systems, and how people need to look at the various levels at which bias can come in. It could be architecture, it could be the outcomes, it is the data sets itself. What are the personas that could be involved in creating these biases, and how audit systems are going to be helping in order to build the systems which have less bias, and also I think the feedback system, which you mentioned, the data disclosure, how documentation is also going to be helping to reduce the risks, to own the risks, and to mitigate the risks as a whole is very, very important, I think, as a whole. And the various sample data issue or the benchmarking issue that you highlighted, I think it is so important. And as you indicated, that data set actually is a representation of people, and what is auditable AI. I think these are the points that people need to really think upon, that having an independent auditor, a third party certified professional or a practitioner, and having the binary rules, independent rules, and having the proofs or evidence of what these AI systems need to present so that the audit is successful is the way forward to mitigate the risks and the biases in the systems. Thank you, and I move on to Richard, and then we can start the panel discussion. Richard, over to you if you want to say any few words, and then we can move to panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Jaisal. Just a quick thanks from myself, Iran, and of course for Simon as well, who spoke before that, and Ati as well. So informative, and thank you for bringing these ideas. I think, you know, we all find our place in this ecosystem, and we all develop our place as well. And MKAI, I think we're a catalyzing force, we're an energizing force, we're a communicative force. But you know, what we want is for people to come into this community and for the sum of the parts to be greater than the whole. And that means that, you know, we're so pleased to point people towards Ryan, and for humanity, that is a place you can make an impact right now in this world and the challenges that we have. And we are very pleased to be in that sort of navigation role and supporting organizations like yours, Ryan. And thank you again. The irony of you saying, I think I'm boring people, as I was literally spellbound with what you were saying. So I'm not sure. I think you're being humble. That was a wonderful talk. We've got a new face on the screen, Hema. So welcome. It's so very good to see you here. So this is Hema Lakkaraju, founder and CEO of HEAG Corp. 12 years experience in health and life sciences, in the industry as strategy and compliance leader. She's been creating strategies and helping products and projects release 40% faster using data-driven strategies, expertise across health, medical devices, diagnostic startups, and including large corporations and organizations as well. She's a business partnership, regulations, and compliance strategy consultant. And Hema, you are very, very welcome here. And I'm very glad that you've come to join this conversation, picking up on what we've heard so far. What I would like to do is I'm going to take myself off the screen and let Master of Ceremonies, Jaisal, start this panel off. But I would love somebody to replace me here. So who's been listening to this who thinks, I want to be in this panel right now? I want to contribute to this. I want to bring my thoughts into this. Who's going to give me a wave? Who's going to step forward? Dean's waving. Are you waving at me, Dean? Or
Yeah, totally.
All right, we can have a hot seat, Dean. Totally, so let's put you in the hot seat, Dean. And if you want to stay in the hot seat, great. If you want to come out of it, then we'll do that as well.
Cool. But just let me know when is the time.
But Jaisal, we have had so many views and questions coming through. I don't know how you've been monitoring it, but I know you've been trying. So over to you. I'll be here if you need me, but I'm sure you won't. To get started, and let's try and make some sense out of what we're hearing tonight. We've got plenty of time. Over to you, Jaisal.
I've been monitoring some part of it, but of course, it takes a while to pick up things, but I'll go on as on the fly as well. So I think welcome to all the panelists and welcome Hema on the panel group. We have had all the speakers in here, and welcome Dean as well on the hot seat. And I would start the conversation. Hema, I would start by asking you that what do you think, which are the personas do we think might be responsible for introduction of bias in the AI models? Because what happens is always it's the developer who gets the eye that, okay, it is the developer who introduced the bias, but where does this bias get introduced, by which personas?
Yeah, so hi everybody, really excited to be here today. And I want to take this point by viewing AI similar to an organization. So it have 3 P's: product, process, and people. Okay, so for AI to answer the bias, or even for us, now we are in the 5th industrial revolution where we have the AI and human interference. And together we are building not only just the digital healthcare ecosystem, but a smarter healthcare ecosystem. And for it to happen, we have to include the processes, product, and people concept of it. So in respect to that, the very important thing that you need to understand is it's the commitment, confidence, and collaboration. Commitment, we are not just counting on the developers, but we are also counting on the steering committee, which will have the end users, which will have clinicians, which will have the bigger stakeholders like board members, which will have the people bringing in that will represent the end user, who can be a patient, who can be a customer, who can be, and the major researchers like clinicians, and also the major stakeholders who represent the vision of the organization. And it's the commitment from all these people together to build a algorithm, to build a product, to build a service that gives a major commitment and higher level service to the patient. Why this is important is it's bringing in different diverse set of visions from different people who have one goal. And the one goal is to serve the patient or the customer better. And the developer brings their skill set in terms of the development, but they have no clue in terms of the ethics. They have no clue in terms of data collection, in terms of diverse set of data. Why it is important, when it is important, and what it is important. And bringing this steer committee of developers, designers, bigger stakeholders in the organization who have a particular vision for the organization, how it have to serve the patients or the customers, and bringing the end user's perspective. What does the patient want, or what does the end customer want from this service or the product? Will together build a common vision, and will also answer most of the challenges that we have. And that will answer 3 parts, Jaisal. That will answer what we are doing with this AI, why we are doing it, and how we have to do it. And this is very, very key for success, and to remove any biases that we have, and to contribute towards the final goal of the AI, whether to serve the patient or the customer better. Another important thing that we need to understand when it comes to AI is not evil. Like any tool, it needs guidance, it needs a process, it needs a vision. And for that, it needs a collaborative vision and skill set coming from different sets of people. And that's where steering committee comes into place, which have a common vision, not towards the product, but common vision towards the end user, what we are trying to provide them. And that's where the key of success will lie.
Thank you. Thank you, Hema. And I will move on to Ati. Ati, can you add your insights to this? And I will be moving around the table and asking everybody else as well. So yeah, Ati, over to you.
Thank you for that. I think what I've realized in the space where we talk about there needs to be steering committees, there needs to be a group of people that will review the code and the intention of the code. But I think what a comment that Ryan made was that data is a representation of the people, right? But what happens when the people on the table are so what's the word? There's a lack of diversity, right? In that there's nobody there to actually double check that they are actually being biased, because their ways of thinking are actually quite similar. So I think what I've learned is that the focus on diversity within an organization is starting to become more important than before, because if we don't have the right people in the room with the right kind of voices, right, to check each other, we could have all of the automation in terms of the audits, but if our audit teams are not as diverse, right, there could be an assumption that the data in of itself is a representation of the people. But if the people themselves are not a representation of the demographics of the people in whatever organization or community they operate in, then the bias will cease to reduce, because there's nobody checking on each other, because everybody is the same.
I think Ryan has raised his hand as well. So Ryan, over to you. This is an interesting topic, definitely for you.
So I'm going to tell you a funny story, and I don't mean to call the ICO out by doing it. We require in our GDPR certification a diversity policy, and they wrote, "Wait a minute, this isn't in GDPR." We said, "Yes, it is. This is technological and organizational controls." And it's exactly to Ati's point, which is that if you aren't requiring, and I want to get away from I hate the term superficial, but the physical ways in which we see diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of how you are raised is as important, if not more important. And so when you build a diversity policy, and that is being enforced by an empowered ethics committee. So now you get algorithmic risk committees, the group responsible for these systems, by name in this audit infrastructure, okay? Now you know that we've solved, or at least begun to solve, Ati's problem. In addition, we have that diversity policy playing out over the diverse input and multi-stakeholder feedback loop, that required human agency that is designed to assess the risk and impacts from the system. This isn't conversation anymore. This isn't maybe it'll happen. It'd be nice if it happened. Oh, we should do this. This is, if you didn't do it, you are not compliant with the audit. And you know what? Amazon got hit with an $887 million fine on GDPR. I guarantee you their attorneys said, "We are compliant with GDPR." I guarantee you. And they thought they were. I don't think there was bad intent here. What our GDPR certification will change is embedding all of these organizational rules, all of these accountability structures into a system that now, if you want to be certified GDPR compliant, you will have to do. And that is a big difference from talking about it, thinking about it, and so on. Compliance asserted and assured by a third party that it's been done. Something the public, people, can count on and trust.
I think I really understand how independent auditors are so important for the systems. And Simon, over to you. Would you like to add some insights from you for this question, please?
Yeah, of course. So like Ryan you talked about, I guess, having, some strong, independent, reliable, like third party to audit. And I think just to add to that, it's also important that we continually work towards educating everyone to basically make that team, to become those people who are able to do that. And so at least from a from a developer's point of view, sharing work and development within fairness and bias, I think, is very important to help train these people or get people excited, about tackling some of these problems. That sort of communication in that community is really important, and I think, ironically, there will be some systematic biases that need to be fixed in order to get it's a bit of a I don't know, like chicken and the egg problem, but so everyone just needs to always be tackling bits of this where they can, because improving detecting and managing bias in data is only going to help us to improve managing bias in data.
Thank you so much, Simon. Ian, Ian, your hand is up. Would you like to ask your question quickly?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. We are.
Okay, my question basically has to relate to a certain extent to the blockchain space, right? So in the blockchain space, the issue for payments was creating some type of consensus mechanism that could be relied upon in order to approve transactions. And so in order to approve artificial intelligence algorithms or data sets, for example, is it possible to create some type of automated third-party consensus mechanism that the community could agree upon what those indicators were, but it's an automated approval process as opposed to making this completely human. So we're just looking, is it possible to create some type of ground truth that you can automate, that could be exposed, all the information could be public. So just a thought, as we're working, some of these issues out ourselves.
So I would call upon Ryan to take the question, and then I'll move on to the other panelists as well.
Sure, I'll say quickly, a proper auditor serves as a proxy for the public. So it removes that need for fully public information. Now, we demand a large amount of actual public disclosures where we think the information for the public is required for good decision-making, informed decision-making on key elements of data privacy or trust and so on. So there are public disclosures that are required through the audit process, but the vast majority of this is held by the auditor acting as a proxy for society, and that's beneficial. It's been proven in the past, heavy regulatory oversight requiring complete transparency is innovation killing and stifling. Because now you have to expose trade secrets, you have to expose intellectual property, and it basically makes companies less interested in innovating in the space. So the concept of an independent auditor, a proxy who can be held under non-disclosure, but is held to a high standard of, I don't work for you, I work for the public, right? Acts to protect intellectual property, protect trade secrets, but also give that assurance that's required of the public. It's kind of a blend of a fully public versus, if you think of it as a spectrum, fully public, independent audit, heavy regulation with full transparency. It's kind of the meet in the middle solution.
Thanks, Ryan. Ian, would you like to hear from any other panelists?
Yes. I mean, I just say that, to kind of respond to what he was saying, in the blockchain space, you have a ton of innovation that's being done, also in the AI space. For example, Singularity Net is an example that I'm sure a lot of us know, and they're using blockchain technology, and all the information is public on the ledgers. And so people can't necessarily see what what exactly you're spending money on or where your resources are going. But it is a lot more transparent than, any other system that I've seen. And I see a lot of systems, going in that particular direction as far as, being able to automate that accountability aspect of it. But yes, I do agree that there needs, in the meantime, there should probably be a human aspect as well.
Right.
Yeah. Add to that at all?
Yeah, yes, please.
I was just going to comment. I think it's, using blockchains, it's a really nice, neat idea for, having some system or some process where, the decision is decentralized. So, by that sort of definition, provided everyone has, the knowledge and the ability to, take part in some sort of blockchain technology, then it's a really great idea. I think part of the issue that sort of blockchain is facing right now is that not everyone wants to take part. You know, there's a huge entry to barrier. You know, I've tried to read a lot about it. Even I don't know very much about it. And so Ryan sort of touched on you know, having some third-party auditor or something like that. I feel like it's a similar thing that we have in a lot of governments. You know, you elect someone to represent you. You know, and so I feel like personally there's an easier way about this. You know, having some third party that you can trust to actually manage that rather than you know, putting it completely just in the hands of everyone. What can happen a lot with blockchain is that you know, a small percentage of the population actually controls it.
I would also
easier then it's definitely something that, you know, becomes more of a possibility.
I would also just very quickly add, auditor doesn't have to be a human. We have a number of groups inside of For Humanity who are already building comprehensive system solutions to receive and accumulate and collate and identify key issues that have to achieve compliance. It can be highly systematized. However, there are elements of the audit criteria that demand human agency. And honestly, that's for the benefit of human. And I'll argue all day long about whether humans should have control of AI. The answer is yes. And I'll go to the maths on that one.
Absolutely.
Like
yes, Hema, please go ahead.
Jaisal, Ian, there's been a recent development where people are creating like blockchain kind of a concept for health records. Okay. And the main reason behind it is we are moving especially in the healthcare industry, from a technology-centric industry to what we call as a patient-centric industry. And in the next few years, what we will see is there will be no separate health tech, there will be no separate fintech. There will be only one industry, which is customer-centric industry. And all these partnerships and acquisitions and mergers that we are seeing, like big tech companies buying healthcare and fintech and all other companies, they are going to create a bubble around each customer. And customer profile is well known to those people than us. So blockchain might be a kind of a solution where the patient have the control and patient can decide where the healthcare records go. At the same time, it's very important to have that awareness in a two-way industry. One from the organization point of view and one from a customer point of view. We always talk about the organization should have these controls and so on, which is true, but also it is equally important that the customer, the end user, the patient who is using the AI tools or who is using the blockchain technology have to understand what are they dealing with, what is that doing, what is that service doing to me, and in return, what I'm giving it to them. We have a very famous saying here, what we say that if a tool is free, then you are the IP of the tool, okay? And which means that the data is the payment that you're giving in return. So when it comes to blockchain or any other technology, it's very important to understand from 3 points of view. What is my final intended use? What is its risk and what's its impact? Not just from the customer point of view, but also the organization point of view. And the third-party vendors who play this role, especially in terms of information processing, data storage, data transmission, we always look at from a tool point of view, organization point of view, or from a patient point of view. We don't look at from an information cycle point of view. And it's extremely important for the tools like AI to look at from an information life cycle point of view, from the information entry to processing, to transmission, to storage. What are the roles people are playing? What are the access they have? What is the intended use, risk, and impact at each of the stage? And that is the best way to do it, because we are now in the 5th industrial revolution where AI, artificial intelligence, and ethical intelligence will work together in inclusion. And at the bottom line, for it to work, we have to have the data intelligence. And that's the better way to put it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Dean, would you like to add any insights to it?
Yes, I would love to add the words. And the thing is, like, AI is fundamental. We know Tabata is going to be here, and we have been working with it, and this is our future. And we need to understand, like, where are we right now? Which level are we? And ISP, and in my research, what I understand, we are in World War IV. So in World War IV, every time when there is a war or something, everything is very clouded. It's money-making market, and it's like very not understandable situations, and not understandable tech, and not understandable, like, organization and governments, how they are behaving and who they are saying, because the technologies nowadays we have, if I don't have smartphone and it's not updated in a right way, or the program is not updated, I cannot use the ID. The Swedish ID system is like, I need to have that. So the people who's living in the street, they cannot have it. They cannot even have the bank accounts or anything like that. So there is a bias in us. Like, and thank you, Ryan, to make that sure, and to make that you confirmed it, that we cannot eliminate bias. This is like impossible to eliminate bias, and like, we need to just work on it in some other way. And Hema was talking about, like, you want to see, like, what, why, and how, and I think so. It would be nice to understand, like, why are we doing this, and for whom, and are we doing it for humanity? Are we doing it for us, or is just a war business, or just about the money making business? And where are we right now, actually, and why? And after that, we can check it out. How are we going to do that? Who are we going to involve? Are we going to involve the people who doesn't understand that things? Are we going to educate them, or are we just going to left them behind, because those are the people, because they cannot just, they don't understand. We are making digital cities, we're making twin cities, we're making, like, cool stuff, and control. Those people are not important, you know. And organizations like that for humanity is inspiring me so much, because this is about humanity needs to connect with the humanity. And this war's benefits right now. And we have seen in war, like, it has been different. There we are not involved, we just get hurt all the time. But in this war, we can change things. We can understand humanity in totally different perspective. We are dealing with bias. We are talking about bias. And this is like a mind-blowing for me to understand, like, how humanity has been, and what we are talking about in a technology. No, we can do this and we can do that, but actually we are humans, and we have so long history, and eliminate things is not the right way. And like, we need to work together. We need to educate people, as Simon said too. We need to educate people, really everyone. And how we will do that? Who can afford it to be educated, you know? So yeah. So all those things are very, very important when we think about the bias and humanity, AI, new technology, and World War IV. It's good to understand. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dean, for adding your insights. And Ati, you have raised your hand. Can you add your insights as well before I move to the next question?
No, I think I wanted to comment on Dean's question about who are we doing this for, right? I think when I look at the inherent bias that exists, it tends to be quite elitist in nature. So if you are a board member and you want an organization to increase your value of your investment, it's in the best interest of that organization to try and reduce, manage, or control the bias. Because if you look at the use cases that I was talking about, is that the misunderstanding of a potential target market could actually have an impact on the bottom line of the organization. Because as it is, there's a lot of people that are excluded because of the inherent bias that people have. So now I feel like there's almost like a business case for diversity, more now than before, because there is no physical borders. Organizations are operating across different geographic locations. So it's in the best interest for whether board members, CEO, the top executives to actually understand the impact that bias can have in its bottom line. And the moment you increase or reduce your levels of biasness, it means that you're able to have a bigger target market for whatever product that you're doing, because you are not making ill-informed decisions on who to target or who not to target. So I think maybe that could be another angle that actually promotes the reduction of bias in our code, because it actually could have an impact on organizational bottom line.
Absolutely, absolutely, Ati, I agree with you. Moving on to the next question, and I would start with Simon. There is a question from Mike I would like to ask. Do the panel think that there should be less regulation, but stiffer penalties or unified firm frameworks for compliance?
It's interesting. There's questions about what, are penalties some sort of regulation in some sense? I think that the most important thing is clarity on, I guess, what the impact of some bias is in any given situation, and clarity shared like amongst everyone, and it's sort of we promote education to the point that anyone can get the same clarity about what the impact of some decision is and how it affects them. I think that's the most important thing, and then the regulation or people can then decide whether or not regulation is something that is then needed. Looking at it from this point of view, I couldn't say whether or not regulation would be the right way to go about it, because I can't describe the whole problem. Whereas I can just help promote, I can at least help promote people to understand, the different types of bias, or provide, try to provide some place where people can share their ideas and learn together. I know it doesn't quite answer the question, but it's only because I don't think I could probably say.
Thanks, Simon, for adding it. I'll move on to Ryan to add some insight, and then Hema as well, and Ati.
Hema had her hand up first. I think you should let her go first.
Yes, hi, Hema. I think you should go first.
After. Yeah, Hema
sure,
go first.
Sure. Hema, can you just go for it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think overall the idea is, what we have to understand is not any two products are the same. Not any organization is the same. Each organization is unique. Each industry is unique. And we will eventually go in the next few years where it would be integrated industries. So in terms of regulations and governance, it would be challenging if we say AI for healthcare, because now healthcare have IoT aspect of it, as Ryan said, cybersecurity aspect of it. Healthcare especially have become a combination of PII and PHI information, which is personal identifiable information, personal health information together with the integrated technologies. As we move on and we have more and more technologies getting integrated in all these different fields, it becomes extremely challenging in terms of regulations if you bias it per industry. What we can bias it is on terms of GDPR is an amazing example, right? In terms of information, in terms of its risk, its impact towards the final end user. And then again, no AI tool is, we can't say all AI tools are high risk. We can't say all AI tools are low risk either. It depends upon what its risk and impact towards the consumer. So if we can design and develop the regulations and standards based on the information, its risk, its impact towards the final patient or the end user, we will have a much more smarter, sustainable, and measurable regulations and governance overall.
Absolutely. Before I move on to Ryan, Ati, do you want to add anything? Okay, I can sense that Ati is saying a no. Moving on to Ryan to add your insights finally.
I had the privilege to address the APPG AI in late June, and they asked us what what policy suggestions would you make? I have one. Mandate independent audit of AI systems. Now, why? Do we want trust? Just broadly speaking, do we want trust in our systems? All systems, no matter how they impact us, systems that are put upon us where we're either the subject, data subject in the input, or we receive the outputs, right? The answer is yes, we want an infrastructure of trust. I'm sorry, companies will not do it themselves. They will not. So that's why it's this simple concept of just make it normalized that everybody has to go through this audit. Now, is the audit the same for everybody? Not a chance. The audit is jurisdictionally sensitive. As much as we might want to talk about a global normalized norms and so on, laws are made country by country, culture by culture. That is not going to change anytime soon, okay? So the audit rules are built jurisdiction by jurisdiction, top down, board accountability, CEO accountability, chief data officer accountability across every AI autonomous system. That's normalized. Underneath that is an AI by AI by AI, autonomous system by autonomous system specific set of rules. And if that sounds like an enormous task, it is. That's why we need people in For Humanity to help, because we will build audit criteria for everyone in every jurisdiction around the world. And there's a lot of work to do, but we're doing it. We're starting to do it. We're engaging with regulators and governments around the world. So if you ask the question, what regulations should be in place, they're coming. The UK is doing fantastic work on GDPR, on Children's Code. The EU has got the Artificial Intelligence Act. It's got some silly parts to it. It's got some amazing parts to it, okay? The US has done so little. It's like the Wild West. It's garbage. People are not protected. You even look at the NIST framework. We are responding to the NIST AI risk framework. The whole framework does this. It takes a company and it looks in. How does the company protect itself? And I'll be honest with you, it made me want to vomit. So we're responding to the NIST AI risk framework, and the whole framework that they have in place looks in at companies. And I'm like, where the hell are the people in the equation? So our whole response is built around improving that, changing that perspective so that humans are in the equation, because they're not now. So if you ask the question, do we need laws? Do we need regulations? Absolutely. Do they need to be heavy and onerous? No, they need to be precise and specific, built around governance, oversight, accountability, focused on ethics, bias, privacy, trust, and cybersecurity.
Thanks, Ran, for adding that insight. I would be probably asking Vibhav to add his insights before I move on to the next question. Vibhav, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just take a minute. That was an interesting question on regulation. I think it's a fantastic panel discussion. I just had a few impromptu thoughts. When you're looking at regulation and penalties, the question I think was that whether you need regulation and whether penalties work. Penalties would work in a more deterrent sort of a scenario. I'm sort of just bringing in the legal aspect. We look at it in two. If you're looking at regulation and penalties, I think you have to look at it in two ways. One is before you come to the market, and the second part is when you're in the market. When you're before the market, certain thoughts, bias, what with the conversations on bias, what types of bias are there, where does it come in, who is not in the room, who is thinking and responsible, who is thinking on and responsible for thinking on bias at the design stage. Is it fair for it to be the developer, or do we need someone else at the design stage? And how do you assess the bias at the design stage? The points I'm bringing all these points forward is just to highlight that when we're talking about penalties, laws, and regulation, there's a step before that. That is in terms of awareness, in terms of before it comes into the market, while it's being developed, there is a certain level of understanding and awareness on which the legal framework will be built. So the legal framework could very well take care of these factors, which, as Brian's work for humanity on audit systems or any other compliance mechanism may take place. Once we have this in place, then the second part of the law would be conversation about, if it's in the market, what kind of impact does it create? And what kind of impact should law be concerned about? Is it every single impact of artificial intelligence, AI, or is it some specific impacts. When we're talking about legal regulation in the context of bias, or in the context of, especially in the context of bias, we have to be clear which part and which aspect are we looking for regulation. If you're only thinking that pure penalties are going to work, not convinced, because penalty is connected to compliance. Compliance could, if without proper input and understanding, you could have a legal provision that really doesn't meet the expectation. That was only my limited point that I wanted to add to that question. Thank you.
Thanks, Vibhav. I think this is really important that before we go to the market and once we go to the market, how important it is to look at both the aspects which people generally miss out. And moving on to the next question quickly, the question is from Neeraj, and he has asked, what would be your recommendations for organizations to have a measurable, actionable debiasing strategy? Should the approach contain a portfolio of technical, operational, organizational actions? Hema, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I can. So before even going to the actions to make the technology thing, you have to first understand on what basis you're doing it. So as Ryan said, so it is extremely important to understand what your organization stands for, what is vision and mission towards the end user, and how are you going to attain it in terms of whether it's data collection, transmission, using the tools to process the information and so on, and how much of AI plays a role in it. Another bigger challenge that we have right now is the heavy involvement of the third-party vendors because of the business partnerships and heavy integration that we do with the other platforms. So when you have the checklist, do consider and do create a framework based on the information that you handle, based on the information that you're processing or transmitting or doing analytics or taking decision making on behalf of the customer. It can be an medical image analysis that can help in terms of cancer. It can be a diagnostic thing. It can be just a good to have lifestyle kind of an app. So if you can't really understand the information, the vision towards the final customer, the risk and impact it's going to have, and then based on that, create high, medium, and low priorities, and then create the technical controls and operational controls, rather than just going blindly for organization. The major problem where most of the organizations lose their operational cost and time is not having a proper priority in terms of what we have. We have inventory systems, but do we actually have an asset management and inventory system based on the information that we handle and have that high, medium, and low risk inventories, rather than just having a team-based or a department-based systems where it takes 20 to 30% of more operational cost and time to maintain. So it all breaks down to that center data intelligence or information intelligence. And based on that, able to create a smart and strategic technology and operational controls. And that's where the key value comes into place and effectiveness of your efforts comes into place.
Absolutely. I think it is important to have the data intelligence. And as you said, metadata is the key in many areas, and many inventories also need to be maintained. Ati, would you like to add anything to this question from the panel?
No, I actually don't. And I just realized that I actually need to go. And I know there's 15 minutes left in the session. So is it possible if I can drop off now?
Absolutely. Please feel comfortable if you need to move on. It's a great pleasure to have you, and your talk was so insightful. Yeah, and the audience can connect to you on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Ati, Richard, would you like to add anything for Ati?
Oh, just before you go, yeah, just thank you from me as well. And of course you can go. I didn't actually see that you got a note to leave early, but on this occasion it's okay.
Yeah, it's 15 minutes earlier. I just forgot about it. But I do apologize for having to jump off.
Please don't apologize. Thank you so much for the time you spent with us.
All right, cool. No problem.
All right.
Right.
Thanks. Thanks so much. There's a comment that has come in from the audience, and I think we also want to hear from their views what can happen. So Michelle has said, I'm interested to know if anyone here has worked in tech with an actually diverse data on product team. I genuinely haven't ever seen one or been part of one. That's my biggest concern for future of AI in private consumer tech. So first I'll go on with the panel and then ask the audience if anybody would like to get involved to answer this. Simon or Hema, to start with. Simon, have you ever come across where you have given the examples to start with, but would you like to add some insights?
Yeah, definitely. I'm very passionate about this. I think a point was made earlier about how a lot of digital products that are now made, they serve the globe, and there's often a very big disconnect between the hiring pool and people working on something, and in terms of the population that then actually receive the effects of whatever the product is. In all my experiences, I've never had too international a team. You can have one country, two countries, people from 3 or 4 different places. It's still never, I guess, representative. You're all in the same role. You're not necessarily consuming the product. I think one solution to this is really moving towards open sourcing, as much software as possible. And that's what we're doing with this Fairlens code repository. Having some software to really look into how can you showcase and at least detect different biases within your data. I would love for if anyone wants to suggest ways of assessing or measuring bias and fairness within data. There needs to be a place for people to collaborate on that. And so that's why we created Fairlens as some place where hopefully anyone can get access to start tackling this problem.
Absolutely. I think open source code or inventories are really important that we need to look at from this perspective. Ryan, would you like to add any other insights to this?
Absolutely. First off, for those of you who know me and how I work on Zoom, I've seen the chat and I've been desperate to dive into the chat, but I can't dive into the chat and stay focused up here, and it's killing me because it's a great chat. So let me just say that first. When it comes to diverse inputs in the design and development phase, I'm actually going to make an argument that I wish I didn't have to make, but I think it's true. It's impossible. It's impossible at the starting point. And I'm going to tell you an example from For Humanity's experience. The original theory of For Humanity crafting audit rules was that I would curate a dialogue. We'd get experts in the room and the experts would write the rules. And we started this with digital contact tracing 15 months ago. For Humanity was one person, me, and we got a bunch of people in the room to write digital contact tracing rules as COVID was, kind of blowing up. And we got in the room and crickets. 10 days in, 5 audit rules. So I'll get back to you in 2030 when it's done. But it's not going to happen. So what that shows you is that having diverse inputs actually might be a hindrance to start. But please hear me when I say diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback is crucial to an end product. So then the question is, how do you work it in? And I loved Simon's answer. It's the right answer. He uses the term open source. I'm going to use a slightly different term, used differently, which is crowdsourcing. So what happened in this process was a few of these people in the crowd came back to me and they said, this isn't working. And I laughed. I'm like, yeah, I see it. What do you want to do? And they were like, you write the rules. And I was really taken aback by that because I had this concept of diverse inputs in my head. But they said, look, you got it wrong. You could write perfect rules, the right rules, and it doesn't matter unless others come in, endorse, review, test, oversee, apply, make law, regulate, whatever, okay? They said, get us started, just get us going. I said, fine. I stepped away. 5 days later, I gave the group 238 audit rules for digital contact tracing because they were right. I did have a path. I had some idea. But here's the thing. Even if those were perfect, it doesn't matter until that crowd pours over it. And that's when you have to have diverse inputs, multi-stakeholder feedback, open source, crowdsource, whatever terminology we want to use. That's where we need to have this broad oversight and still review process. Because when I put those 238 rules out, it was maybe a 70 or 80% effort. Because now you've enabled many people to go line by line, word by word, definition by definition, find the problems, find the misses, find the mistakes that a middle-aged white dude made when he drafted some ideas. There's nothing wrong with me being a middle-aged white dude, nothing, okay? But I may not have sufficient perspective to put down the right set of governance. And so you need to put it out to other people who have different lived experience, different ways of thinking, different approaches, different backgrounds, and make sure they feel included and are included and have that robust voice. So Simon, it's exactly right. Jaisal said it too, right? More open sourcing, more crowdsourcing, but along the lines of at least at the review level. Let's not get too hung up at the design level, at the day one level, because unfortunately that's just not how things happen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That makes so much sense to have a process that is, you know, led by a team that have a goal and it doesn't get too chaotic. But you know, the focus of that team being trying to stay as open as possible. You know, trying to keep the engagement, always making sure that that's sort of being invited, so that it can be steered by the crowd essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think crowdsourcing is the key to bring in diversity into the data and the auditing system both. I have a suggestion that, Richard, would you like to add any of your insights to this one? Definitely.
Yeah, I would like to add a quick word to that, and it is an agreement actually, but I think to answer that question, you could look around your AI team and see different ages, backgrounds, gender, skin color, and think, okay, great, so this looks like diversity and inclusion. It does look like diversity and inclusion, but then if that's in a company, to reinforce the point here about crowdsourcing, think about what they have in common. They've all been hired through the same process. They've got the same incentives for promotion and further compensation. They're operating in the same culture, and they have to fit into that. That's a form of compliance. That's why these people even start to dress the same, walk the same, talk the same. So if you're in that company, you're paid to fit in, right? So that's why you've got to look out. You've got to look beyond that. Got to get to the open innovation. Got to get to crowdsourcing. It's what we're about. It's what Ryan's about. Many others. It's where the magic is. That's what I'll say about that.
I think it's a really exciting point and something that maybe sort of been brought upon having to, you know, work more remotely in the past sort of 2 or 3 years, and that's you know, development products for, you know, developing open source you know, software and solutions really improved, and it's, you know, it's getting easier and easier to, you know, start working on something with 3 other people who you've never met before. You don't even speak the same language as them, but you all speak the same code language, and you, like, that idea is just really exciting, I think. You know?
Just want to give you some of the updates on the recent collaboration efforts, as Simon said, that we have seen and that I'm fortunate to be part of. There is a data collaboration alliance that is formed between United States and Canada, which have a very diverse set of people from multiple industry sectors, from multiple privacy, cybersecurity, all those aspects. And we are creating a course projects around data breaches, a lot of other, as you said, Simon, open source projects, a lot of other collaborated, creating the training materials and education modules for more people around the globe to learn. So it has become until we have a common vision, we can definitely go through some people initiating it, as Ryan said, and there will be more people putting in their peer review or their inputs towards it. But also there is a common language around diversity I would like to add, and this is kind of a little bit different input, and it will get implemented, and it makes sense for no matter how big or small your organization is, whether it's government, non-government, or an alliance or so on. So diversity should not be defined by race, ethnicity, and everything in an organization, but it should be defined by their expertise, their experience, their knowledge that they're bringing together, in which we will be a missing piece in that whole big puzzle. And the diverse thinking, expertise, skills, all those puzzle pieces of people coming differently from those different expertise, skills, background will make the puzzle pieces together and create a beautiful tapestry or a painting with a bigger vision. And that's how I see the diversity as.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hema, for adding that. And I would move on to my last question to summarize this. We did discuss on our last LinkedIn Live event, and I would like to take it in continuity to that, that data is very expensive, and hence people are moving towards synthetic data. But ideally, to solve real life problems, you need the real data from people, the diverse data itself. So do we think really that if people were to sell their personal data, which become the data sets, would that mitigate the bias? Because Hema, you rightly highlighted, sometimes data becomes very old and it's outdated. So in order to solve this and to keep the data relevant, would this be a solution as well? I'm saying one of the solutions. So Hema, what do you think on that?
So let's mainly go from big data to smart data and then to synthetic data. Okay, the bigger challenge that we have. There are two big challenges that we have right now. One is we always look it from a tool and technology point of view and say that the technology is the final cure, which is partially true, but not completely true. Because if you can't understand where are you going, why are you developing the technology and what it's used, you will now have, at present, the problem is we have all these humongous millions of tools and platforms, and all of them are siloed, right? They are not providing a complete solution. They're providing parts of the solution. And most of the tools are pretty much similar. It's the same with the data. We are talking about big data management tools and softwares and platforms. But why in the first hand are we collecting the big data? Why? What is the reason how we are collecting? If we don't have a vision of the data that we are collecting and the reason why we are collecting, it's a loss of operational cost and time for organizations. So first we have to have a vision. What kind of information are we handling? Why we need the data and what it would be used for. Similar for the synthetic data. We have to create a requirement around the synthetic data. What are the data sets that we need? What it would be used for, how it would be used for, and did we actually consider, for example, if it's a cancer drug clinical trial that we want to use for with the synthetic data. The history of the data is not always determines the future of the data when it comes to AI, because things are changing so fast. So it's a real-time data, mimicking the real-time data. And the synthetic data also have to be regularly evolutionized based on the changes that's happening in the real-time data and considering all those factors of geographical, demographics, race, ethnicity. And the synthetic data have to kind of mimic the real-time data, considering all the changes that's happening around the community. And that's where the synthetic data might bring in the value. When you're saying selling the data, now again we see in healthcare especially, the patient wants to take the control of their information, not the providers, not the patients. And that's the reason why we see a rise of health platforms where patients can bring in the data from all different medical devices, all different digital apps, and they will be in control of the data, and they are ultimately accountable for the data. So if that goes on, then the synthetic data process will also be driven by the patient, but again, the real-time mimic, what it would be used for, and based on that, creating the requirement around the synthetic data and how it's going to change or when it needs to be changed, and its continuous monitoring is very important.
Thanks, Hema, for adding the insights. I think I'm being conscious of time. I cannot take any other questions or panelists. Thanks, Ryan and Simon as well to add all your insights. I would just summarize quickly. It is so important to have diversity and inclusivity. Along with that, to have the information cycle, the data intelligence, the way we are doing the benchmarking is so important. Along with that, having a third party independent human in the loop as an auditor is important, who becomes like a representative for the people itself, and inherent bias needs to be removed, and industry-wise context has to be added so that that data becomes very much relevant. I think we have looked at types of biases, how to mitigate them, what kind of societal impact it is having onto us, and it is now important that across the world, if organizations work together, this can be mitigated and AI can bring in more success rather than the fear that people have. Richard, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jaisal. I'll just close quickly then with a word of thanks. First thing I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to save the chat and then put it into a hardback and start selling it as a book, because it's just phenomenal, the content in there. But we all signed a waiver, didn't we, that we own that content? Only kidding, of course, and it will be up. Sans the personal messages, we'll put the main content up on the website. So as we ran tonight, thank you so much, Simon, that launched us tonight with your very, very interesting opening talk. Baton over to Ati, who is obviously departed now from this session. Ryan, thank you so much for the contributions you've brought. Hema as well. What a fantastic addition to this conversation you have been. And then our impromptu hot seaters, Dean, thank you for your contributions. Really appreciate it. Vibhab for yours. Jaisal just shining as our moderator. If we had to try and hire Jaisal now, it'd be like trying to buy Messi or something, you know, we couldn't afford it, but we got her on the up, so it worked out. Alex, Karen, for your support, Odelia, for the pre-prepared pieces, and for all of you spending 2 hours of your day, your precious time here. Do not take it, we do not take it for granted at all. We try to make sure it's possibly the best 2 hours of your day that you could spend. And we're hugely humbled and grateful always to see you. We are, it's a huge pleasure. So we draw at 19:03, we've missed it again by 180 seconds, but we're close. Videos will be up very soon. Stay tuned. You know where we are if you need us. You want to collaborate, talk about anything, do anything potentially, you know where we are. We're an open book on these things. But so we'll draw this session to a close, and then we will probably turn the recording off and have a little catch up afterwards, just to see how this has landed on a few people here. You're very welcome to stay. Get back to work if you want. Go and have your tea if you want. If you want to stay around for a few minutes and chat, then I'll be here. I'll keep it open.
Please stay, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. So do put your mics on, and then we can just say thanks or goodbye or anything like that. And we'll put the screen back to gallery on this side.
Thank you so much, guys. And I'm so happy to be back and so excited to see you, and all the learning and all the sharing. This is so amazing. And this is like mind-blowing thing for me, like how we are connecting worldwide. And I'm so grateful and thankful for MKAI, Richard, Ryan, and every one of you. Thank you so much.
We're grateful for you. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Richard.
Pleasure. Of course. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for all your contributions on the chat. Did you see me share your LinkedIn feed?
Hi. Good stuff. As long as people don't take it too seriously.
I know the feeling.
Thank you so much for this talk. I really appreciate the time that all of you, took to sort of share your thoughts on and your expertise on this. For myself, it's been so interesting. I know Luis and I had a pretty long back and forth in the chat, but for me, it's been so interesting because it's difficult to explain how I feel about, I guess, being a so-called underrepresented person within technology and within data. I'm trying to think of what I want to say first, but I guess essentially I'm just really thankful for this discourse because I think most companies, most venture capital, most people within our sector, for the most part, do not want to discuss this. And I think that that in itself is incredibly problematic, because if we don't address this, this is going to be a giant problem. I mean, problem to the point of, in the United States, until I believe maybe February in certain states, and I think still even today, this is occurring. There are, criminals that are being sentenced based on artificial intelligence. There are, people whose intellectual capacity is tested based on artificial intelligence. Myself, I worked in big tech for a few years. And then over the pandemic, I decided to found a company, which, we started as this fun consumer tech company, a dating app, and it led down this rabbit hole, which is how I ended up in data and AI. This giant, rabbit hole, because we started having, talks to people, and then the accessibility community started being very vocal with us about their lack of using consumer tech products like dating apps and social platforms. And through that, I started trying to incorporate accessibility and neurodivergence actively within our company. And that was how I discovered there's no data sets that are holistic within these groups. And then when I had a CTO, and I'm going to shut up soon, LOL, sorry. When I had a CTO, our CTO was in charge of, all of the stuff on the product and software side, because I was acting as CEO. And, I looked around one day and none of our product or software looked like me. No one was a woman. We actually didn't even have anyone who wasn't living on the West Coast. I mean, it was almost to the point of outrageous. And we actually had to structure our recruiting significantly different in order to create a pipeline. Because what I noticed was, so there's certain statistics that I think are super relevant to the 80-18, which Ryan perfectly articulated earlier. And one of the issues is that several studies that have been done have shown that people who identify as male are way more likely to apply for a job, for example, when they are 60% qualified. And women are much more statistically likely to apply to a job if they meet 100% of the standards listed. And so we actually tried several different platforms, and we tried several different phrasing of how we were going about the hiring process for software and product. One of them was, we didn't list anything. We didn't say, people from underrepresented groups encouraged to apply. We didn't say, if you don't fit 100% of the criteria, apply anyway. We had no language on some of those postings. Then we did other postings where we included that information, and the rate of diversity that we started having coming in, just adding those two parts, we ended up having over a 60% increase in people from diverse backgrounds. And a lot of these people were people who traditionally, I know for certain, would not have gotten a job in software or product, because either, you know, perhaps their previous experience was internships because they had to work. Some of them were moms who were out of the workforce for a while, who were coming back into the workforce. Other people who had done these really expensive tech programs, ended up back home. And then, of course, you know, you have the circumstances that, you know, a lot of millennials can relate to, which is, you know, being very high in student debt, living with your parents, then a pandemic happens. What do? You know, so we had a lot of people that were out of work. We had people who are neurodivergent. And I actually would have these interviews with people. And one of the reasons that I decided that I was going to essentially Phoenix the company, so that I could, you know, really focus full time on trying to create holistic AI, which is going to take me probably 4 to 5 years, but I'm totally here for it. But one of the reasons was I literally was privileged to work with who I consider to be a genius, who is neurodivergent on the autism spectrum. And because of the incredibly minute accommodations that this person needed, even within falling into like way higher metrics than, you know, other candidates, he was unable to get a job. So what frustrates me about the diversity and inclusion issue is that we are so focused on race, we're so focused on gender. The genius that I'm talking about that couldn't get a job because he's neurodivergent is a white male. You know, this is an issue for medical accommodations. This is an issue for veterans who have PTSD, who are coming into the pipeline. This is an issue who can't even come into the pipeline, by the way, in most cases in the United States because of varying degrees of barriers to entry. We're talking about women who, you know, myself as a founder, I am a Black woman. I did not know when I became a tech founder that only 38 Black women prior to this year have raised more than $1 million in VC funding. So when I talk about the difference between bias and discrimination, this is what I'm talking about. So everyone has biases, completely understandable, but there is discrimination that is indirect just due to, you know, how we've lived as a society. You know, those practices are literally, you know, it's coming to a point now where I think that this absolutely needs to be addressed, which is why I think, you know, it's incredible that your organization put this together. And it's also incredible, you know, that we've all been able to convene here, you know, and organizations like the Algorithmic Justice League, which I'm a part of. And, you know, I just feel so thankful. But yeah, we all really have to be all hands on deck with this. And I'm finally done speaking. Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it was really insightful. A couple of things I think that you're mentioning about hiring as well is it's always useful to, we don't know what you don't know. Some of those pointers about, making sure, having certain attention to detail about, certain ways things are, presented to others, I think is so important.
Yes, it is crazy, this stuff. A friend of mine, he's a pastor. He's, he's Black in skin color, and he's also a doctor and a professor of chemistry at Kent University. And he used the bathroom, he used the toilet, and a woman saw him go in and glared at him, and she waited outside until he came back out and confronted him and said, this is a staff bathroom. This is like a few months ago, like, this is a staff bathroom, you're not allowed to use that. I'm like, it's 2021, you know, like, just phenomenal that we have these so strong biases that we can't, overriding everything, all sense, all logic. Still, so much work to do.
Behavior is hard to change. You know, we're wired to resist change because any change is seen as a danger. So you know, we have to override that, but it and a lot of it is at the unconscious level. So the majority is at the unconscious level.
I hate to say it, Anna, but thank God for death.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, those the example that was presented in terms of how athletes are described, you know, we continue to perpetuate those biases, and journalism is really guilty at doing that, because every time someone is described in the paper, that is, you know, you might have the same crime occur. If it's white, it's high school, white high school, and it appears to be engaged in this crime. If it's you know, a person of color, then criminal, you know, perpetrating a crime in this area. So just the use of language, you know, keeps perpetrating those same prejudices and biases. So part of it is really becoming aware and learn and start to change the language and demand a change in language and demand and ourselves, you know, be called out. We need allies to call out and say, hey, when we see bias and prejudice perpetrated, call it out in the moment, because a lot of the time the person doing it is not aware that they are doing it.
Calling it out so powerful for climate change as well, just pointing things out. You know, why are you doing that? What's that about? Manager. Everyone knows I can't pronounce names.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me. Yeah, manager.
Oh, it wasn't too bad then.
Not too bad, not too bad. Very good. Well, thank you for letting me come. I'm not a tech professional, so I'm a little intimidated right now, but I am a human development professional. So I teach mindfulness for UCLA, and I'm, you know, just training human development. But I'm writing a book right now, which this is why I was so interested when I saw this on LinkedIn to come. And my book is about optimizing the human software. And throughout all of my years of, you know, training, practicing, growing, healing, learning, teaching, guiding, all these, you know, the Buddha's teachings and the mindfulness teachings and psychology and business and, you know, all kinds of education and all that. So I've kind of synthesized it. And when I developed a model, a 5-stage model for human optimization, I realized, wait a minute, there is a model that existed before becoming optimized. So I found or discovered and created the model for humans who are stuck. You know, just stuck in unhappiness, misery, irritation, upsetness, and how does it happen? So I created the 5 stages of that. And so biases are huge, and how they form. And how the moment they form, the moment they come about, this talks about a lot of things from the brain perspective, how the brain has truth biases. Now the neuroscientists are telling us. Truth bias, confirmation bias, novelty bias, and of course all these other biases. But then, you know, with, for example, just the truth bias, anything that occurs to you internally, or someone says to you, if you don't have the mindset to investigate it, or you don't have extremely good information about it, you just accept it. That's the way the brain works. You accept it as truth. This is the truth. So how many things do we go to find out if it's true or not? We don't. And then little by little, you know, the clinging, the attachment, the preferences, the fantasies, the desires, and the rules and regulations and all kinds of, like the example of the bathroom we said. Yeah, we set this rule and we think it is absolute. We don't realize we made it up. We humans made it up, and then there is a priority about, look, this human needs to use the bathroom right now. That takes precedence over this rule we made up, you know? So I'm learning all about this stuff, and I really wanted to hear how the human bias, what channels does it travel through, and how does it impact other humans, what other channels, which we're talking about the AI, how does it impact other humans' perspective about the planet, about other, you know, other forms of beings, and us ourselves, and then what happens to the next generation? So I'm writing all about this stuff, and it's been fascinating to me. Anyway, I could talk about it for a long time.
Oh man, when's the book launch? We need to celebrate. We need to have a party.
Actually, you know, I've been doing some presentations with some people circles, and a lot of different like psychologists and therapists, and even a genius autistic person in the tech told me, oh my God, manager, this is an incredible two models I have. You know, the model of the human who's stuck in just being unhappy and picky and miserable and whatever, and the model of optimization. They're just really, so part one of the optimization is proper or essential knowledge that we do not get growing up, right? The first stage of the stuck model is information. This comes from anywhere, uninvestigated, you know, biased information comes. We just pick it up. As the day we are born, we pick it up and we build our own business. You know, my premise is that we design our own human software. No matter the genes and no matter how we learn things. I mean, from teaching, training, and watching people, I've seen, oh my God, everybody thinks this differently, slightly differently, even from the same culture or even from the same, you know, background or family or whatever. Everybody's slightly different. So I realized, just like me, I don't, you know, utilize Excel, for example, full potential features that it has, just a little bit, just a mundane level. There are features in our human software that we do not know how to use. We don't have the skills for it. We don't have the knowledge for the potential of it. And so we have to teach. We have to bring it out. We have to show what is this feature and how deep you can go, like the features of the heart, features of the, you know, the compassion or the concern. Is so biased, right? It's just, if it's related to me, my child, my neighbor, my somebody I like, I care for them. But the person who's driving, you know, on the street, I don't care much about it. So it's a feature within our human software. We're not really deeply understanding, or, you know, I'm looking at it from the skillfulness or unskillfulness, right? That you know, mental illness can change through this model, the perspective of mental illness. Instead of bad people and good people, skillful people, unskillful people, you know, developed people, undeveloped people. So these two models, one, I realized, oh my God, I can't have judgments about them. You know, the stuck model. I still have probably one of them. And, you know, living through this software of the stack model, and then the optimized can really change. So just in the first stage, giving essential proper knowledge, for example, death, right? Look, the bugs died, the king died, the emperor died, the grandfather died, the mother died. You know, the death doesn't even exist. It's just transformation of you know, this physical body, physical everything deteriorates, and everything is supposed to deteriorate. Well, why are we so against it? And
oh yeah, our relationship with death, don't get me started on that, right?
Can you
Terrible.
imagine we can just change the notion of our reaction to death? And I have lost a son, so don't think I don't know anything about it.
I know. I imagine
the suffering that could be reduced. So anyway, that's the whole thing.
No, it's brilliant. It's these stories, these concepts. I just imagine like people a few thousand years ago, like, you know, John turns to Jane and says, God, isn't life short? And she says, compared to what? But now we know that the universe is 14.5 billion years old. We know, oh my God, our life is so short. It's not. It's everything you're ever going to know. How is that short? It doesn't even make sense.
Yes. So this bias of in the algorithms and all that, though I'm not the expert in it, I will somehow bring it in and address it in the section of essentials to know about life, you know, and then so you become aware and you develop and you transform and then you optimize. So it's a very, very organic actually model, I think, with both of them that could be translated into other systems, not just the human system. So I'm working on it.
Very good. Come and guest blog for us.
I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah, but one of my questions was that, is there any way you guys who, I mean, probably not, but is there any way to include sort of like, you know, how we teach ethics or compassion, like to humanity? Is there any way to embed in the coding into the AI? Let's say I'm just, you know, I'm a very simple tech person compared to all of you. I learned from my son, he's a genius, he teaches me. So let's just say QuickBooks, just for, you know, make it simple. Is there any way that coding can be put into those programs where these regulations you're talking about that needs to be imposed or looked at, or the audit or whatever, that can do that, preventative rather than, you know, because we can do that, right? Humans are, you know, we learn from everywhere, but the AI, the robot,
I mean, there's a blunt instrument on this. I mean, decentralized autonomous organizations are the blunt instrument to try and embed decision-making through smart contracts into an organization, which are now legal in certain parts of the US, but that's you know, that's not nudging towards what you're going to say. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Well, one of the things that I mentioned on that, and I'm going to get the link, maybe somebody else grabs it faster than me. OpenAI created a hide and seek game. And then they imaged that hide and seek game. And what was amazing about that is they tried to create it with minimal rules and let it learn. Well, it learned how to break the rules so fast, and then it would break more rules, and it would break more rules, because the game is optimized, as most AIs are, to win or to achieve a value-based goal. There is no system that's sufficiently nimble enough to have multiple goals and to know how to achieve all of them or know how they intersect, unless it's programmed of how they intersect. And thus our goal orientation system as humans is the thing right now that makes us so distinct from programming. We can act suboptimally right now if we want to. If we want to stop and stop our work, stop being productive, stop adding the value we were focused on because we want to go hug our kids. And the systems that we have are unable to operate with suboptimal thinking embedded in those sorts of collective value optimizations, and without a set of rules fully coded in. And the thing is, you'll never think of all the rules. And thus the system is designed to figure out what you didn't think of and break it because it's trying to achieve better and better. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense, but it sounds very much like a human being to me. Look, I have a 4-year-old niece who came over this weekend, and she tried to teach me a game that I don't know and she knows, and to play it. I could literally see her rigging the game to her own advantage. 4 years old. It was unbelievable. I'm like, oh my God. She kept winning, and I'm like, oh my God, you're rigging the game.
But isn't she doing that because she enjoys the winning? I mean, what Ryan's saying is that the human playing chess, Lee Sorrell, he can never escape the fact that he's playing chess and that chess is a beautiful game that we enjoy. Whereas the AI obviously doesn't know it's playing chess. It's just maths. It's not the same, right?
But no, but look, what Ryan just said, that AI will figure out what you haven't ruled, put in a rule for, and to break it. It sounds like the desire, the craving of the human.
That sounds formalization, though. That's
well, yeah. If I may, so the answer is your sorry, daughter, niece. I can't remember which one you said, but she's decided to break the rules and is singularly focused on winning. Which is also, you're right, that's what the AI was doing. Most of us, however, play by a set of rules most of the time, unless we feel like we have the chance to change it. And that kind of goes back to that point that was made kind of an hour ago, which is, do we need regulation? Do we need rules? And the answer is we do need some rules because there are none right now. And when there are none, everything's possible. And when everything's possible, bad things are possible, legal, allowed, done.
So AI will use the codes that you gave it to do something different than the codes that you gave it?
It's worse than that. If we take AlphaGo 0, so here's the history you need to know. The game Go is created with a set of rules, been played for thousands of years. Google created AlphaGo. AlphaGo became the grandmaster in the entire world within 21 days of learning. They gave it all the rules and they gave it histories of playing the game. That was AlphaGo. Now they've created a model called autocurriculum. That's AlphaGo 0. For those of you who don't know, AlphaGo 0 was simply told what's the goal of the game and the moves it's allowed to make, and that's it. AlphaGo 0 taught itself how to beat that previous machine within 3 days, learning with no guidance, no rules, no nothing. And what that should tell you is that machine learning has great capabilities, and those capabilities are probably beyond us to govern after the fact. And that's very scary.
In a closed system, though.
Well, fortunately, that's in a closed system, but what's keeping Google from turning that loose, to be honest? Nothing. There's no rules, there's no regulation. So I wrote a piece years ago. I'll put it in the chat, and I'm going to put my AlphaGo 0 piece in the chat as well. But here's the big problem. Technology is an autocracy. Now, what does that mean? The entire world, how often does the entire world agree on something? Never. The entire world agreed that we should not gene edit babies. The entire world, even places that most of us think are scary, basically said, we will not do this. 3 researchers in China, 1 in the United States, they got together, they gene edited. We thought it was 1 baby, it turned out it was 2. They're going to jail for 3 years. That's it. Any technology can be made by any single person at any point in time, and unfortunately, we love cool new technologies. So the problem with all of this is every technology could be created, whether we like it or not, whether it's good for society or not. And so in that context, that's a problem that we have to manage, and we're not prepared to do it.
Okay, I will continue training people to be good then.
Thank you.
That's what I could do. Thank you. But I have Dean. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add something there. It's like, now I'm touching a lot of buttons here, actually. So it's like with this technology that we have a privilege to understand our past, the decision that we have made in our past, actually. And because it's all about data in, data out, bad data in, bad predictions out, bad result out. So if we put in the past data in and see what comes out, like Amazon's and Facebook and all others, big organization that they have put in past data and biased data, and then the result is like that. But we can learn it. This is AI is like, for myself, that is speaking from my eye, that I feel like I can learn more about humanity from AI than a human, you know, because of I can put the past in the machine, and machine will like tell me this will happen, this will result happen, and what will happen? Discriminations, segregations, and like breaking people in different parts, and human being hasn't lost his value. And now we have created this tech that we can bring the value of the human being together, bring it back. So this is what I believe in, and this is, I really hope it happens. And this is all up to us, human being, because this technology, this tech is about connecting with people, collaboration with human beings, and yeah, this is what I believe in, and it will give us the good answer what it should be, or who we are actually, because subconscious, we learn from our experiences, and 90% we do, or 98% of things we do with our subconscious. We have like no clue what we are doing actually. But yeah,
it's a superpower and a super weakness. What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah.
Your cat is so cute, Dean.
Thank you so
like
much.
I've been staring at it for the past few hours. Well, my question to the group here, and I'm really thankful that you all are okay with staying a little bit over, but yeah, my biggest question is, Richard, you mentioned DAOs, the decentralized autonomous organizations, and there's a lot of interesting things happening in data with BitClout, for example, where the idea behind it in theory is that you would be able to own your data and people would be able to bid and purchase your data for a fee, which in theory is awesome, because right now we are the products, within consumer tech. But
I don't think that works, by the way, but hopefully I can come back and talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts and everyone else's thoughts on DAOs and decentralization and the idea of self-ownership over data. Like, where are we? Because my head is spinning every day. I'm finding something new. Thank you.
The major concern that we have around the data. Hey, this is Hema, Richard. The major concern that we have is, see, we have a certain framework, certain expectations from organizations, at least now to a minimum extent, when they're handling patient information or personal information. But we don't have any guidelines or any framework or any helpful awareness for the patients who want to handle their own data. It can be chaotic. And that have to, before giving that full access, we have to have a training and awareness campaign around what it can lead to and what are the risks and impacts around it. Because the thing is, mindful sharing is good, but not understanding the pros and cons of it, it's very hard. For example, if I have the teenage between 18 to 25 age who are putting their personal videos, everything on TikTok and Instagram and so on, But if I say that I will give you 4 bottles of wine, just give me where do you live, what's your address, what's your, what are your tastes, we don't really give it. But I'm saying, hey, I have a free app, you can just play around with it, but in the meanwhile, just I'm taking your personal information. We don't, most of the people don't even think it that way. So I think that's where the awareness comes into picture. It's very, very crucial for the society to have the awareness before we give that power into their hands.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm not usually one for jumping in, but this is the topic. I mean, actually, we're hoping to put this into a book soon. Is that, so in my case, first of all, Michelle, they have the data already. The big companies already have it. It's not changing. My date of birth isn't changing. These kind of things. Second thing is, I feel that Google and others are going to show us all of this data and metadata that we have, and then say, look, you have complete control over it. You can choose what you want to take away and whatever, and then we will delete it permanently. And I think that's a ruse, because I think it's become less important now. And remember, this decade, we're moving from screens and apps anyway into spatial computing. We're moving into 3D computing with augmented reality, virtual reality, what might be called the metaverse, possibly. Now, the data collection of that's very different. It's a lot more. So right now, this webcam is dumb. It's not doing anything, but the camera on my phone always tracks my gaze. So as we move into the physical world with machines, it's different. Connected cars, same thing. Facial recognition, same thing. I highlight one of these, right? The Oculus Quest 2. It's a backdoor into health data. So when I wear it, it's understanding where I'm looking. It's got cameras on the outside. It's reading the room, the dimensions, the people in it, the brands that I'm looking at. It's analyzing my movement, my flexibility, my agility, my stamina over time. It's there's 8 different things you can get just from looking at my eyes. So how is the granularity of that going to be represented by a company like Google that says, I'm going to give you control over your data? Their granularity and my granularity are completely different. That's 2 million unique data points from 20 minutes of use. Where's that in GDPR?
It's there. That is there. That's in GDPR.
Enforceable?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's where we're going with this, with our certification scheme.
What about CCTV? What about Alexa in somebody else's home?
I'll tell you the thing that's the real problem in that space is actually AV is harder than VR. So VR we know that's a locked body of you and it, right? So we can track that. The difficulty is AV. So now it's me and the Google Glass, but you know who's out there? A whole bunch of other data that I'm also collecting without permission.
Yeah, but
no
this has got cameras on the outside, right? Look at everything.
That's the same problem. It's the same problem. It's called field of vision. Yeah. We refer to it as field
Apple
of vision
headphones
data.
are going to have those cameras on them.
Right. That creates a huge problem that is not in GDPR that will have to be addressed, and it's not legally defined yet. We call it, we've defined it as field of vision because related to consent, there is none. So therefore, what right do you have it? But it's already collected. So what should they do? Like, nobody's right or wrong here because nobody's even gone yet to what this is. But I will tell you, if I'm standing with you, you've got your Oculus on, you're recording me, that's not cool that I'm in there. It's not cool, right? And so we will have to deal with that, but the law is not there yet. I mean, honestly, we're not even close.
Thanks, Ron.
But we'll tackle it. We're going to try.
I think this is one of the big problems with big data is that, whilst it's, like some people say it's like an oil of this century, but really that there's more and more and more of it instead of less and less and less, and it gets less and less useful as well. And as we're creating more and more data, the actual signals, the bits, the concepts or the information that we care about gets more and more diluted, and so it gets so much harder to manage. When there's you've got some little bit of signal that's been diluted across some huge amount of data, trying to regulate or put some sort of compliance on that is so difficult because it's so hard to even detect these signals. You know, it can just sort of like slip through. And I think that one thing I've seen a little bit, and it's been talked a little bit about today, just in different ways, I think, is this concept of moving towards, I guess, instead of having, you know, a data warehouse, having, you know, more data as a product or data as a, you know, data as a service, where you're, instead of collecting and storing, you know, all the data, you instead move towards, okay, let's create some optimized, I guess, collections of data that really show specific signals. And so this idea of having some data product, which is, and I think this was mentioned before, some data with a designated use case and some designated ownership, it really then provides a structure to be able to describe what the data is for and then license it appropriately, or work out, you know, if it's defined what signals this data is supposed to represent, and if that data has been optimized to show those particular signals, be it, you know, your movements from Oculus Rift, you know, transformed in some way, then we can get to maybe more of a, you know, a feasible task. Because the way it's going with how we store data is just not feasible. It's just too hard. There's just too much signal dilution.
Too much signal dilution, too much of redundancy and duplication of data at multiple systems and platforms, which open the gates for more vulnerabilities, right? Especially in healthcare, where you have a lot of third-party management. They are copying the PHI information on their system to process it or to analyze it. And that vendor is, again, subcontracting to another vendor to do part of the processing. So, so it's rather the one way is, as you said, Simon, the next billion-dollar market or the next big challenge that we have right now is how to transform that big data into smart data, data of value, data of vision, as you said, and how we can do it. And the second bigger challenge that we have that we can solve with technology is that how we can eliminate these copies of data and have a centralized location. But the challenge again is, if we have a centralized location of the data, it would become more vulnerable if we don't save it, right? So it's like a chain of challenges with pros and cons of it.
Yeah, definitely. On the note of, I guess, you know, creating this sort of smart data, something that you know, we look at Synthesize is trying to create different types of smart data by supplementing original data with synthetic data. And I've heard sort of synthetic data mentioned a couple of times today. I find it interesting gauging what people's opinions of synthetic data are, because as I've sort of worked with it more and more, the only difference between synthetic data and real data is that, you know, there's just one more step in the chain of numbers in a database and what they represent. You know, synthetic data still contains real signals. It can still contain or represent real people. It can still represent real information. And, you know, people, I guess, get a bit concerned with using synthetic data sometimes, because instead of original data, because of this sort of worry, like, oh, what if my synthetic data doesn't contain the signals that were in the original data? And the question is still the same with your original data, because your original data is still a representation of the reality. You know, there's no real difference. And sometimes you can, we found that you can use synthetic data to actually improve the signals that you care about in the data. It's just sort of like an interesting concept, and I've sort of been thinking a lot about what you could do with synthetic data and biases as well. You know, can you sort of supplement or you know, even reduce or try to tackle some biases in data using synthetic data?
Well, sort of a manual override.
Yeah, yeah. If you have, you know, underrepresented examples, you know, you could at least synthesize some. You know, whether that then just induces more bias, you know, it's up for debate. But an interesting idea, at least, to explore.
I remember looking about a year ago, and you type in CEO into Google, and DuckDuckGo, and DuckDuckGo showed middle-aged white men, and Google showed a variety of genders and colors. And I thought that's interesting, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even for synthetic data, the core value comes in is the diverse sets and the real time, how much we can mimic the real time. But again, it pulls in, as you said, how much of the real time data represents the diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, and all those things. So in terms of synthetic data, I think we can do better because we can include all those biases and try to mimic the information and try to put in different attributes, in which case sometimes the real-time data is not pulled in, but you can take it from the academic studies and so on with the diverse sets. I think that's the advantage of having synthetic data on that point.
Okay. Is that a natural pause for today, do you think?
I just noticed the time.
The good conversation continues.
Yeah.
Infinitum, so we don't have to solve it all in one night.
Yeah. Can I just say, so this is my first time sort of, you know, being involved with this, and it's just been a really, really great experience. So, you know, I thank you everyone for, you know, being here today. It's been truly awesome. I definitely want to, you know, be a part of any discussions or, you know, get to hear what's going on. So.
Well, Simon, thank you for that. And the feeling's mutual. You brought so much tonight, and in the spirit as well that we try and live and breathe in, you know, of listening more than we talk and these kind of things. So thank you.
Especially since lockdown sort of happened and we sort of got pushed away from being able to meet and engage with people, this idea of, you know, online communities is really, I feel like, it's one of the best things that's come out of lockdown for sure. I feel like it is something special. I sort of feel like you get to connect with people in a much more real sense sometimes. Because you're all there, but you don't have to be there if you didn't want to be, and it's quite nice.
I'm so happy that you say that, Simon. I feel the exactly same thing when I came here first time. It was like mind blowing. It was like, whoa, what? Oh, really? This is awesome. I just want to be here all the time. Yeah, man. I want more and more. Serious people and be connecting and sharing information. Love it. Love it. And thank you for all your all the sharing that you have done too.
We have to find each other. So
yeah.
God created all of us.
Totally.
And spread us all out across the globe.
Thank you for the panelists. You know, just again mind-boggling, and for my little tiny brain, a lot to process. You know, I call myself an orphan because I think that this community has adopted me because I'm not in the AI world. I have no connection to AI technology, and yet I think it's, you know, just everywhere. So as a human, I have to, you know, be flexible enough to try to understand it enough to try to contribute a little bit from a totally lay person, absolutely totally lay person. To the conversation, but I appreciate all your brilliant minds that are really working toward really what's in the best interests of humanity. I think that's a common theme, and that's, you know, really do no harm, you know, help humanity, save the planet, and you know, control this thing that we have created, and that we better guide and manage, otherwise it will, you know, absorb us.
Yeah, definitely.
So I wasn't the only one, Anna. Thank you. The layperson who's concerned about humanity. Yes, thank you. Well, I appreciate being here amongst all you brilliant people. Thank you for that. I put a link there. A couple of you talked about human connection. I run just once a month connection hour where we get together, whoever wants to come, and we talk about whatever is on our heart, minds, challenges, and I kind of facilitate a way of holding it for each other, holding the space with kindness, compassion, with wisdom. How do you hold the space for somebody else to just pour it all out or whatever, you know? So if you're interested, please join us. It'd be lovely. Second Tuesdays of every month. I put the link there. I
Wonderful.
can put a link.
Thank you. I see.
Yeah.
Thank you. We missed your hand, Lukman. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. My apologies. But let us know if there's anything that we can do. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night.
Good night.
Stay happy.
Good night.
Good night.
See you,
Be
folks.
safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Be safe.
Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Take care.
Bye.